The following program does not have a normal intro because I was really too busy smoothing other things over to get it done. So, Ori? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Viewers Discretion. I'm your host, Joe Neerman, a.k.a. Good Lawgic. Hope your weekend has been going phenomenally well. Mine has been going okay. Okay. Like, really just okay. Really just okay. This time of year, one of the major yardsticks I have for measuring how good my weekend is how good my fantasy football team is looking. And I had in my Good Lawgic team is I'm not liking it. Something feels off. I think it's better than it showed, but anyhow, and that just sort of makes me just sit like all afternoon and evening going, and I don't like that. I feel like then, like when the day's over, I like wasted my day. Even when I end up winning, I feel terrible about that. It's not a good feeling. I don't know. I'm starting to question this whole thing, whether it's a vice. It's a vice. Could be it's a vice. Oh, there are worse vices out there. But few things I want to share with you. First and foremost, this was pretty funny. I'm saying this is pretty funny as I'm about to share something with you, which has been going around the internets today, the interwebs today. It's been going around, and I'm fully aware that there's like a 50-50 shot that if you're watching after the show is over, you're not going to get to see it because they're going to make me like yank it out. They're going to say, oh, no, this is music that's protected by copyright or some idiotic thing like that. It's very possible it's going to happen. I can't promise you it won't. So it might be very confusing to those of you coming after the fact who you were like, Joe, you're just talking to us, and a second later, and you're pretending you already saw it. That means I had to edit it out. But that also probably means it's really good. So I don't know what to tell you. I got to share it. What are we not going to share it? I'm not going to share it just because it's like some work for me. No, I'm going to share. We're going to share it. This was great. Kamala.
So you know how those lids are, because this is, I'm just going to speak, okay? So this is it. So you know how those lids on those Starbucks cups, they're white, right? And so if you wear lipstick.
This is real. This is the person who wants to be president.
They get all over the lid. And so then I find myself in meetings if I'm the only woman, and that's kind of it. So I keep taking the lid off and having my cup out so that I don't have that big lipstick mark on the lid. So I said, can we do something about the color of the lid? So that was that conversation.
That was great. That was really, really good. That was really good. That was really her. That's not AI. I know it's hard to tell these days. It's very hard to tell. But that really was her. So I wanted to share that. A couple other tidbits I wanted to share with you. There's a few things I thought about talking about law and politics, mostly politics, because let's face it, we're less than 2 months from an election. Politics are going to dominate the main. They're going to be the meat and potatoes of what I'm going to be covering over the next couple of months. That's just reality. And perhaps beyond, if it's as contested as it was in 2020, which a lot of people are anticipating it will be. So politics are going to dominate this show for the next couple of months at the very least. Tonight, I just wasn't in the mood. And yeah, so I spoke to my producer and I was like, look, just give me a night not talking politics, just chilling, watching something cool. And yes, it is pure social anxiety. Yes. So I just I will get this out of the way here. It's just this is something Elon put out earlier today, I think. Was it today? Yesterday. He put this out yesterday. So this was actually kind of a cool idea that he came up with, which I think would be actually kind of sweet. Which is, here's what I'm thinking. We host a presidential debate next month on X and invite both Trump and Harris. If Harris doesn't show up, we'll just do a video town hall with me and Trump. If she does, we'll have a debate. All questions come directly from ex-users. Thoughts? You know she's not showing up. There's no chance she's showing up. I mean, come on. Come on. She's so freaked out about this debate. She is so utterly freaked about this debate. Terrified. Supposedly locked away. You know, she had something where she went to Penzeys Spice Place, which is some crazy leftist spice place, which has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in trying to get Trump impeached. I mean, they're lunatics over there. So she went over there to hang out and looked so awkward and uncomfortable. Like, just awkward and uncomfortable. So there's no way she's going to just do an impromptu debate moderated by Elon. There's no way. He's doing that to sort of gin up the views. And I respect that. And she ain't coming. Time for a palate cleanser tonight? Yeah, this is a palate cleanser. Yeah, this is a palate cleanser. We're heading into a couple months of raw politics with occasional law here and there, as probably only if it really relates to politics. So yeah, this is a palate cleanser. I've had 179.88 points with Devo Samuel yet to play. The next highest in my league is 101.56 with one to play. I had a great start to my fantasy team. Yay! I'm very happy for you. I'm very, very excited for you. See, no one wants to hear it. They don't want to hear from me. They don't want to hear from you. I spent all night just waiting for Amonra to just get, I don't know, 50 yards to give me a win. 70 yards for a win. Very frustrating. All right. The other thing I wanted to share with you, I want to explain to you what it is I'm going to be watching tonight, because this way you can better understand. There is an individual who has a channel which is called What If Alt History. What If Alt History. I stumbled on this channel probably a month or two ago. And he's a young man, very clearly. And he talks about alternative history, like if things were like a little bit different, how that could have radically changed history. And I don't always agree with what he says. He certainly seems very educated, intelligent. I'll give you a little sampling of him. He's got 660,000 followers on the YouTubes, and he does good work. He does very interesting work. So I'll share with you, here's a little clip of him doing sometimes he'll do he'll look back at history and say, what would have happened if the Germans had not gone into Russia, or that sort of thing. Like how things would have likely unfolded, like what we could see based on what we know, and try and it's interesting conceptually, his way he approaches it. Well, anyway, so here's a sampling of What If Alt History right here,
which is one of the most important swing areas in all of America, and that it often determines who wins the whole presidential election. I went to two different grocery
stores. He's talking about how he lives in this place, which is like a real swing area.
A Whole Foods and a Wegmans. The horrible thing is that I can immediately tell the politics of the grocery store within 20 seconds. Whole Foods put a massive emphasis on organic, free trade, or vegetarian foods. The people dress differently in both places, and I actually got weird looks for dressing as I normally do. I could go on 15 other things where we're at the point where conservatives and progressives talk, dress, worship, teach, eat, love, and...
What do you mean start Rumble? I started Rumble. How's that possible? I fixed that a long time ago. Rumble is live, and how about them Cowboys? How about them Cowboys? You gotta spell it C-A, them Cowboys. You didn't miss anything, Rumble folks, okay? With extension of sentencing for Trump is a gag. Gag is also extending. Can this be used for your ungagged Trump case? It's not going to do anything to my ungagged Trump case. It's not going to do anything. I don't think it's got any impact at all. Other than, yeah, I'm okay, fine. It's extended out, but I don't know. I don't know when the Court of Appeal is going to finish with me. It's very aggravating. Because I'm not kidding you. Very, very aggravating. So, anyway, those of you who are in Rumble, I'm introducing you to the person who was being interviewed, whose interview I actually was watching, and I was like, this is a really frigging interesting concepts that he's talking about here. Some of which I seem difficult to refute. Others, I was like, that I could explain that like different ways, but it just got my brain it started germinating things in my brain when my brain was just sort of like popping off in different directions there. And I was like, this is a really, really interesting conversation that a lot of people watch, but not enough. Isn't live. I really hate YouTube chat on the phone. Okay, it is live. I'm checking it. I'm going to refresh. You live stream. It's live. We're live. I'm all live. Everyone's live. It's working. You want me to play it so you can hear me saying that? All live. Everyone's live. It's working. You want me to play it so you can hear me saying that? There you go. Live. Everyone's live. It's working. So, it's all fine. It's all fine. All right. I'm sorry for the delays. Anyway. Sorry, Denise. I'm sorry. Maybe it was my fault. It's possible it was my fault. I'll accept blame. I'm sorry, Rumble folks. Anyway, so Rumble folks, I was explaining to everyone that I was watching this interview with this guy who's the host of this channel on YouTube. I don't know if it's on Rumble or not, called What If Alt History. And he basically looks at, here's a list of some of his videos here.
When the first nuclear bomb was tested in New Mexico, Oppenheimer, the guy who...
I didn't want to start playing that. Here's his why the 2024 was. I like his stuff going back. What would World War III be like? Who will win America's next civil war? 6 countries that'll be superpowers by 2080. But also explaining Mesopotamia, explaining the Aryan invasions, explaining ancient India. He's very into dissecting history, and I think he has some interesting takes, and especially given the fact that Tucker Carlson bringing on I wouldn't call him an historian. I would call him more a guy who's read history and is a really good troll. I think he's just a good troll. That guy that he brought on that everyone's talking about, I think he's a really good troll. And Tucker. The only reason it became a big deal, that whole story with him, in my opinion, is because Tucker referred to him as the most important historian in the world, which is a joke. I mean, that's got to be a joke. That's got to be a troll. And then he's like, why does everyone make such a big deal about someone giving controversial perspectives? Like, shouldn't we be at least entertaining different ideas? And it's almost like, I feel like Tucker is like kind of like baiting into like, all right, the controversial opinion that the historian, in case you missed this story, which I wasn't going to get into a whole thing about this story, was this historian who came on there and was basically saying that the worst figure in World War II was Winston Churchill, because he took what would have been a small conflict and germinated into World War II. That otherwise would have been a relatively small political minor land grab by Hitler. That's essentially what his point was. And Tucker Carlson's raving about this guy as if he's the most brilliant. And he even says, he introduced saying, I said this like kind of like a little bit to sort of, poke, it's kind of maybe pushing the envelope a little bit and calling Winston the worst guy in the war. It's like a little bit. And the guy, who's not a historian, he's read history books. That's not the same thing as being an historian. A historian is someone who actually, goes and researches the original takes, not just reading history as interpreted by others, but you sort of go through Churchill's writings and Adolf's writings and FDR's writings and come to your own conclusions. That's what makes you an historian rather than someone who's read a bunch of books. But putting that aside, because when you're reading someone else, you're basically reading someone else, other people's opinions about history without actually looking at it firsthand and forming your own opinion. So that's what makes the difference between a historian and someone who's educated. And it's not even necessarily educated, because it's educated, we have our education system. A lot of people would look at our education system today and say, I'm not so crazy about America's education system. So if you decide to take from certain authors, you're going to come to a certain slant, because most historians have a slant one way or another. So anyway, the guy's take on World War II, putting that aside, I mean, I would, before I put that aside, I'll just say his perspective is that, oh, well, Adolf kept asking Great Britain, like, I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to fight with you. And he was like dropping all these leaflets saying, we're not your enemy. As if, and that we want to have peace with you. Just let us, do our thing here. Leave us alone. But no. Crazy Winston wanted to like start World War II, which is why he kept, fighting back with them. It's like, yeah, okay. You know that he made lots of peace treaties and never kept them. Any of them. Like any of them. So you're like, well, he wanted it. So that's the one he would have kept. You should trust von Ribbentrop when he comes to Great Britain and says, hey, we want to have peace with you. Because the last person who trusted Van Ribbentrop was Molotov. Then that was the ambassador from Russia. And they formed the very famous Molotov-Ribbentrop Treaty between Russia and Germany. And how'd that work out? Because I don't think it worked out too well for Russia. I don't know. It just didn't. He's like, no, he would have honored that one. Like, what kind of stupid, ridiculous perspective is that? Every time he formed a treaty, it was because he wanted to basically lull his scared neighbors into feeling comfortable that they were going to be one of the safe ones. So I think it's a ridiculous take. And I don't mind people can have ridiculous takes. There are going to be a lot of people that have, more ridiculous takes that I'm going to disagree with and that are pretty easy to poke serious glaring holes in. It's when someone who's, widely respected comes along and says, this guy's the genius, that we're like, really? Really? That's the guy you're holding up as the genius? He's the one? All right. Anyway, so it sort of got me looking into like different historians. That interview, I'm giving you the etymology as to how I come to this conversation with you fine people. And I stumbled on this interview, which happened 10 days ago, between a channel I never heard of, which has like 4.7 million subs. And it's the same guy who interviewed, what was that woman's name? The one who was the running mate for RFK Jr. That same guy. Well, anyway, the name of his channel is Tom Bilyeu. He's got 4.35 million followers. This is him. Tom Bilyeu, 4.35 million followers.
Let me ask, the movie Leave the World Behind, which was produced by...
where he hosts these interviews. He's a really interesting guy. I mean, the interview, the way he conducts an interview is a really interesting thing. And he had this interview with this guy.
And this results in...
from What If Alt History. And I'm watching this conversation. I was like, this is friggin' fascinating. And you can see how far I made it. I'm 34 minutes into it. And I was like, you know what? I really want to watch the rest of this. It's really one of the most interesting conversations I've listened to this year. Because some of the things he says, I think, are really interesting. And some of the things he says, I'm like, I would argue that. So I'm going to that's what we're doing tonight. Sort of chilling and thinking about, like, society. I referred to this as humanities. When I first started this channel, I used to do humanities on a regular basis. And humanities, for those of you, I don't even know if I'm using the term correctly. I just couldn't come up with another term, because I like talking about law and I like talking about politics. And for me, humanities is sort of like philosophizing about society, both on an individual micro level, like what makes people tick, what makes people happy, what makes people, better members of society, what makes people miserable, like that sort of thing. And then I like looking at, that's on a micro level, and I like looking at on a macro level how societies tend to function well versus how societies tend to fall apart or conflict with other societies. So I never knew what to call that. It probably is like sociology, even though I've never liked a sociology course in my life. So I just came up with the term humanities because I'm sort of studying humans. And that's because what I do, the way my brain works from the time I was little, when I say little, I mean from the time from the time my early teens, I would constantly be studying people. And I would try to understand why they do what they do. Why do they act the way they act? What makes people tick? And I would sit there and I would dissect them and I would dissect them. And when I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was stupid enough to actually share with some people my assessments of them, which only made them run in terror and never want to have anything to do with me, because no one wants to be dissected that way. No one wants that. You don't want it. You don't want it. You trust me. You might think you want it. You might think you want it. You might even say to me, no, Joe, I really, really want you to. But as soon as I'm done, you're never going to want to talk to me again. So that's what I learned, basically. Okay, don't do that anymore. And I stopped. But when I was 20, I was like, oh, this will make me like really popular. People are like, wow, Joe, you could really help me understand myself better. No. Stop. If you're any good at it at all, don't do it. At least you can do it and don't tell people that you're doing it. That might be okay. Don't reveal that you've actually like made assessments about people. Because one of the things I tell people, in fact, I was just telling my own daughter this just today. If you want to be popular, never, ever, 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 ever let people think that you're judging them. Never. No one wants it. And when you break people down, they assume you're judging them. So, anyhow, my point being that assessing individuals, assessing societies, assessing what makes people tick, it's just something I've always done. I've always been crazy over analytical that way. So, and I've come to certain conclusions about things that sometimes I'll share here on the show. Now, anyway, bottom line is this is so I was listening to this guy here and I was like, this is kind of intriguing. So I want to hear from him and what he's got, what's on his mind. And just before we get this, because like I said, this guy, some of his perspectives about how society operates, I was like, oh, all right. And then some I was like, all right. We're one solar flare away from going back to the Stone Age. The left is less likely to survive a disaster. That's an interesting perspective. Are they though? Maybe, probably. They certainly seem less likely to be able to work the land, right? We could be dissecting history if only you knew someone to do that with. Great logic. Yeah. I thought about bringing him on here. He's doing his own things. So, just curious, what are your thoughts on the Tenet Media indictments? Is the DOJ thing throwing crap at the wall, or is Lauren Chen a Russian actor? It's too early to know for sure. I spent like 2 hours going through this on Friday. First on Thursday night here on this channel, and then on Friday on Layback Law, we spent like 2 hours, almost the entire show, talking about this story. I can't really wrap that up other than tell you there are a lot of facts that are alleged in there that seem. I mean, right now, none of them are named as defendants. And we were sort of speculating that perhaps they've been flipping on the actual Russians who were involved. And you could talk about the timing being very sus, designed to basically undercut the credibility levels of the likes of a Lauren Chen or a Tim Pool, people in alternative media, which that certainly would seem like something that's in the interest of big government to do. Certainly seems like it's in their interest, especially right before an election. On the other hand, it seems as if Lauren Chen, at the very least, from what we've seen so far, given the very detailed allegations they've made, it seems pretty clear she made some very poor choices in who she was working with. Much more so than Tim Pool or Dave Rubin or who's the third one there? Much more than the gentleman or Benny Johnson. Much more than them, because she was working directly with them, and they didn't even know who she was working with. So, what makes people tick when it comes to money? People are funny. This is true. So, solar flares don't matter. Engineers legally have to incorporate controls when they make the grid. I know an electrical engineer. It's a grift. Interesting. All right. Let's go.
And the greatest lie ever told is the complete fabrication on the information of human nature. When 99% of human generations disagree with us, we should think about whether or not we're wrong.
That is something that to me is like basic. That's basic, and it seems to have been forgotten. This is one of the things that when I look at the left, I'm like, they're constantly trying to reinvent new ways of understanding things that have been easily understood for thousands of years. And like, no, now we got it. It's like, why? Because it's there. That's why.
Z has 90% less buying power at the same age that boomers had.
You can correlate.
Okay, did I not make clear at the outset here? I'm not talking law. I'm not dealing. Tonight is not a law. It's not law. It's not politics. But did I not make that clear? I think I made that pretty clear. I walked in here and I was like, okay, look, I'm taking a night off from law and politics. You want me to start looking into Pharaoh laws? It's not like they're not the defendants here. If they were the defendants here, I would start thinking about doing that. They're not the defendants here. The defendants are the Russians. And it seems as if pretty clearly violating FARA. From if the allegations, if 30% of the allegations are true, pretty clearly violating FARA. So they're not the defendants. Then I would start applying it. Okay, does this affect Lauren Chen is not a defendant. Her husband is not a defendant. So then I could start assessing. Okay, what elements you need to prove. But why would I be doing that for a couple of Russian people no one had heard of 5 days ago? He could flap his ears and fly away. He does have big ears. Okay, maybe a future show. I don't know. If Lauren Chen gets charged, or any of these other folks get charged, I don't think any of them will be. I think they're all working with the feds. I say working with the feds, I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, they got a knock on the door and they were told, you're working with us or we're going to charge you. The other thing I said during the course of that show is you have to realize that they basically, assuming these allegations are true, the Russians went to Lauren Chen and said, we want you to keep making the content you've been making for the last 5 years. And we'll just be sponsoring you and giving you buttloads of money. And then bring on other people. And we'll sponsor them. And they have complete creative control. And we're just going to be giving you tons of money for basically doing what you've been doing. Which is like basically, as I analogized on my show on Thursday night and again on Friday, it's pretty much like going to a long-time, lifelong Jet fan and say, if you go to Jet games this season, I'll pay you $100,000 for every Jet game you go to. You'd be like, all right, okay, that's cool. That works for me. Who wouldn't? That's what, that's basically what most people would do. The only time it really would be an issue is if they start trying to say, I think you should change your opinion on this. Then it's like, okay, now they're influencing you. If the Russians are funding conservative pundits, maybe we owe them a thank you. Now, you're trying to get me in trouble now? You're trying to get me named an indictment? Is that what's happening here? 99% of generations believe the universe had no beginning. We know better now. The woke crap is a psyop, but let's destroy Western society. Yeah, well, this guy is a Gen Z guy who is really smart. You're going to see. He's really smart. And the guy sitting on the left here he's one with the owner of the channel What If Alt History. And yeah, let's them do
inflation and social collapse. If you were to look back at 2010 and you were to write up a story, what would a 15-year period of America's descent into a civil war look like? I could not tell you how it would be different from what we've seen.
What are the historical parallels that you see that make you believe that we're going to have, as Americans, a civil war in the next 5 years?
5 years. That's a great opening question. It's like, let's just jump right into it. You think we're going to have a civil war in the next 5 years? What are the factors that lead you to believe that?
That's a good question to start on. And there are 4 historic conflicts that I think are proxies. And for those who aren't familiar with my work, I predict that the world is on the verge of 2 crises, a political and a demographic and psychological. So I look at, for the political crisis, the thing I look at is the English Civil War, the French Revolution, the fall of the Roman Republic, and the American Civil War. And the way my mind works is I have multiple simulations in my head. And then from that, I figure out which of these simulations the new facts I see fits into. So I say, this is a parallel to the fall of the Roman Republic. This is a parallel to the English Civil War. And through that, I like, one of my catchphrases, I'm betting against God. And
what do you mean by that?
So the world is infinitely complex. It's infinitely big. To be able to predict facts accurately in the future.
Now, when he says this, I'm betting against God. So right away you're thinking, oh, he's some crazy leftist atheist. At least that's what I was thinking. I'm not going to kid you. I was like, oh, he's some crazy leftist atheist. And he may be. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. Because later on, he basically starts to imply that lack of religion is a massive problem for society. It's an interesting, that's why this guy is complex.
Accurately.
So to try not to, the reason I'm going through this is tell you, try not to form opinions too quickly about him or what he's saying. So let's hear him out.
You have to predict all the variables because everything's connected. That's impossible. So my standard is,
which, by the way,
I don't.
That part I completely think that is stupid. That he's like, it's impossible for God to know all the variables that are going to happen in the future. Really? In today's day and age, you think something like that is impossible? If we have computers that can do that with one individual, you think that like in 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, you couldn't develop a computer that could do that? Really? Could calculate that? I imagine a lot less than 1,000 years. So you're saying it's impossible for God to do it? Why? Why would you come to such a conclusion? That sounds to me, when I heard that, I was like, all right, I don't know what this guy, he's got issues with God.
I'm just figuring stuff out. I'm going to be wrong, and I accept that. And so I operate under the assumption that I don't have complete knowledge. And so I try to look at the new events that hit me every year with eyes as unclouded as possible. And so I don't have any pretensions to getting the answer right all the time or even being correct. I'm just trying to figure stuff out. Once the mind is not enslaved to its own creations, it can be free, if you know what I mean.
Okay, so
which I thought that was a really insightful comment. It's true. It's true. One of the greatest powers you can develop for yourself is the ability to say, wow, I was wrong there. I was really wrong there. It's a really great power. So I'm going to really do my best to get things right. I'm going to be wrong sometimes, and that's okay too. And recognizing your own fallibility is a very healthy thing.
With that, you're willing to be wrong, but you're looking for these parallels in history. And I've heard you say that if you're not looking at history to know where we're going tomorrow,
it can be, but I don't think it is here.
You're literally just making it up.
Exactly.
So you gave us the events, but now connect them for me. So if those are the events that parallel us on a demographic level, what is happening at the demographic level? What happened back then? And how does that make you draw the conclusion that civil war is inevitable?
So what this guy, and great interview, by the way, this guy's interview style is really compelling to me because he listens to what you said and then tries basically plugging it in to walk us through it. You just started off by saying that you look at 4 different major cataclysms in history and the factors that led up to them, and then try basically assessing them in a more contemporaneous type of context. We're trying to look at, okay, which of those factors are you, so now he's basically saying, which factors are you seeing here that lead you into one of those four models that tell you we're on the verge of collapse here? Great question.
A book that really, really changed my life was The Great Wave by David Hackett Fisher. And I read it at the start of 2020. And it was just, it shook my world. And so David Hackett Fisher is one of my favorite historians. His other books are brilliant as well. And it's a history of inflation for the last 1,000 years of Western history. And that sounds boring, but it's actually one of the most interesting and best written books I've ever read. And he found that you can correlate inflation with social collapse. And so every 250 years, the West goes through a period of social collapse. And with the previous example in Western Europe and its diaspora being the French Revolution, the wars of religion in the 1600s, and people forget about those wars, but they killed a third of the world's population, as some historians say. Then the Black Death in the 1300s killed half of Eurasia's population. Then you have the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Frankish Empire. And you can trace this every 250 years as far back as we have records, going to the Babylonians. And so from Fernand Braudel and David Hackett Fisher, from those authors, Peter Turchin established a computer model which can predict when these crises happen. And he ran this computer model in 2010, and it showed that the Western world, and America especially, would experience a social crisis on the scale of the 30 Years' War, the French Revolution, or the Black Death in the 2020s. And he... if you're interested, I can talk about more, but he has 3 different variables that are predictive for us, where he plugs these variables into...
I'm just going to say, Denise, I'm not a Russian. You don't seem to like you're in the asset money. I'm the asset money. Yeah, I'm not a Russian asset. And I also want to say again to Rumble folks, I am sorry. That was on me, and I'm sorry. By the way, I feel badly about the delay. I thought I hooked it up, and apparently I didn't. So...
over a dozen historic crises, and looking at them, he can predict these historic crises to have wars the exact years they took place in. And then he's got about 20 other variables, which are also, they're not predictive, but they are variables that you see once these sorts of crises happen. And so all of the flares are going off right now. And the scary thing is that if you were to look back at 2010 and you were to write up a story, what would a 15-year period of America's descent into a civil war look like? I could not tell you how it would be different from what we've seen.
All right, explain it to me like I'm 5. So we've got the demographic ties to the areas in history that you've mentioned. Yeah. We've got the predictive model that has 3 variables. It gives us the 250-year cycle.
Yes.
But if I were a 5th grader or 5-year-old, whatever the statement is, how would you break it down?
That's a good way of phrasing it, because lots of people have knowledge closer. Lots of very intelligent, educated people have levels of knowledge on this topic equal to a 5th grader. I don't blame them for that. There's a lot of things like science or math where my knowledge is middle school too. But so... the way I'm going to phrase this is, in times of peace and in times of prosperity, the population grows. And that's an obvious enough thing. People can afford to have kids, and so they do so. But the problem is that labor, or people working, and capital, or money for investment, they're in permanent cooperation and competition over history, much like men and women. And so once there are more people, the value of their work goes down. And from that, inequality skyrockets. So over periods of prosperity, as the value of the working man goes down, the ability for capital to buy things goes up. This has a series of endpoints where once inequality increases, competition for good jobs goes up because there are fewer good jobs. And then secondly, why
are there fewer good jobs? Maybe there are more people who have talent, who are capable, capacity of. I don't know if there's fewer good jobs. It's more like there's an oversupply for the good jobs. But wouldn't you have more of an increase for more good jobs? Like, to me, his approach that he's taking here is a little bit flawed in that he's assuming that there's a static amount of good jobs. I don't even sure what you qualify as a good job. I'm not sure what that. I'm not sure what the term good job has a lot of different meanings to it. I'm not sure if it means a high paying job. I'm not sure if he means something that gives you a sense of self-worth. I'm not sure what he means by good jobs. And different people would probably define good jobs different ways. Meaning, if you give someone a job as a nurse, okay, which may not be a particularly high paying job, man or woman, his job as a nurse, it may not be a particularly high level job, moderate. You certainly have to go to nursing school. You have to spend some time in it. I mean, investing in that career before you can actually participate. Nurses certainly know a lot more about medicine than I would purport to know, but it's not something that, you're going to get wealthy as a nurse. Most people, when they hear good job, they tend to think money, but there can certainly be a lot of rewarding elements to it, which can bring satisfaction, which I think that would qualify it as a good job for those people who are interested in, dedicating their lives in that path. So the term good job, I think, can have a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. And the point is that you should find yourself in a job that you feel is a good job in a way that's significant to you. And to just assume that that's static and that once you have a larger number of people, all of a sudden now we have an oversupply and the competition is too high, you're not going to be able to get those jobs. That kind of ignores the fact that more people create more a demand for those jobs to be filled. You need a lot more nurses when you have more people. If society has 1,000 people versus society having 8 billion people, you need a lot more nurses to service 8 billion people. So I'm not sure what that means when he says, I think that that's a bit of a flaw in what he's saying right here and now. Russian acids say anti-Semitic things. It's not good logic. He just won't stay out of it unless his silence is dissent. I don't know if they all do. I mean, yeah, Lauren Chen has been, I wouldn't call it, I don't know, anti-Semitic is a strong term. It's a strong term. But I don't think they think of themselves as being anti-Semitic. I don't think their intent is to be anti-Semitic. For what that's worth. It's like saying hard times create strong men and good times create weak men. Yeah, that's true. It's true. Joe, don't hate nurses. Make bank. It's a good job. I use the term nurses as one. I use them as one example. A lot of people have jobs that they find rewarding. It could be teaching. It could be in a lot of different areas that they find personally rewarding. That may not be a high pay. As productivity increases, he didn't say that though. I don't think he actually was saying that. That's a fair response. That would be a fair refutation from him. It's a good point, KMD.
Just stagnate so that people can barely survive. And then, so that's the third variable. So you have inequality, wage stagnation, and competition for elite jobs. And so these are the three variables that predict when societies have civil wars. And so this isn't all wars. The world's wars, for example, don't fit this pattern. The Punic Wars don't fit this pattern, but the wars I described before do. And so what happens once the amount of good jobs shrink, then people start to compete for them more feverishly. So if you lose your position, you're just screwed forever. And so then from that, the society splits into different factions. So for our society, it's the right versus the left. And for each of these historic parallels, they fit an underlying ethnic or class or regional interest. For us, the right and the left is college-educated cities versus non-college-educated countrysides. And so you can add a bunch of other things that stack on top of that. You could do male versus female. You could do high agency versus low agency. or bureaucracy versus merchant class. And so what happens is that the right will push the interests of people without college degrees, and the left will push the interests of people with college degrees, and they fight each other over which of their social groups the society should support. And so previous examples of this are the Cavaliers and the Roundheads in 17th century England. That was the nobility versus the bourgeoisie and the merchants. In the Russian Civil War, it was the center of the empire, the industrial core, versus the fringes. And in the fall of the Roman Republic, it was populists versus the deep state. And so for each of these, it's these underlying interests that split apart the population. And when things get desperate enough for normal people,
Nick Fuentes is. I don't know what he. I think he does. I think he thinks there's nothing wrong with that. Inequality is always present. I also don't think he's real. I don't think he's remotely real. In fact, I'm almost positive that he's a fed. Inequality is always present. Otherwise, we would never have winners or losers. No progress. I agree with you, but the question is how gross that inequality is what he's basically trying to say. I'm not sure.
The active people have the incentive to start a war.
Okay. Why is it that level of dysfunction is solved by a war? That's the part that I always find, I recognize it in history, but just seems crazy. Because so many people are going to die in war. I mean, war is as horrible as it gets.
People are rational in that they search for their own self-interest, but you can often get horrifically irrational results from that. One of the things I read about World War I is it's a series of tiny rational steps that adds up to madness. Where World War I was the Germans thinking, we need to fight the Russians now, or the Russians will grow stronger than us. The British and the French thought we need to fight the Germans, or the Germans will go stronger than us. You add all of those rational calculations up, and it was a war that killed that rendition of European civilization. The calculation going on here is that there's over competition for labor, and the supply of labor has gone up, and I can explain why this happened. The supply of labor has gone up 40% faster than the actual demand for labor. So that pushes the supply of labor down. And
so he's saying there is an increase in the demand, it's just not growing as fast as the supply. So that's why the value of those, that's why when you're supplying the labor, your wages are going to start shrinking in comparison to, like, let's say, inflation, because you're more easily replaceable.
So when I grew up, I'm going to go on a brief tangent, which explains this point well. When I was growing up, I'd sometimes forget to feed the cats late because my parents had me feed the cats. And so when I'd forget to feed the cats late, the cats would fight each other and blame each other for a mistake that I made. And so what happens when the total environment gets harder is people kill each other for resources. And so what these factions are trying to do is, for the conservatives or the leftists, they're trying to control the government to, first of all, remove their competitors, and then secondly, use the government to push their self-interest. So if the left wins, they would have the government push various bureaucracies so the college educated would get more jobs. If the right wins, they would dismantle the entire managerial system.
See, I don't agree with that that's what the left is out for. I actually think the left is out to deconstruct the family and increase their own power. I think that he's taking a little bit of a naive approach here as far as what the left's agenda is. To me, the left is not stupid. I think they're just evil. And I don't mean everyone who votes blue. I mean that I think the people who vote blue in support of them are idiots. I think they're incompetent boobs. And the people who are actually in charge on the left, and not simply the left, but people who are part of the Uniparty, are genuinely evil. They do not care about benefiting society. They don't care about you or their constituents. They care simply about their own power and whatever vehicle they can use in order to amass greater power, greater wealth. That is what their agenda is about. So, you're talking about like they care, as if they care about interests. Not so much.
Which would give jobs for their supporters. And the really unpleasant thing is that in these crises, You can view it in a very Malthusian way. And Malthus was a thinker. He said that overpopulation happens and then population crashes. And we're not overpopulated in that people are starving, but there is an oversupply of labor. And then in these crises, for example, the Black Death, half of Eurasia's population died. The crisis of the 1600s, a third of the world's population died. And so it's this natural biological rhythm that you can see paralleled in the animal kingdom. And where I grew up in Pennsylvania, this happened to the deer, where the deer became overpopulated and they just started, there was deer plagues, there was mass deer famine. And so if it happens among the deer, why doesn't it happen among us?
All right. There's a lot to unpack there. Non-press conservatives have degrees. They have fewer advanced degrees, but those are rare overall. He's drawing the divide on the wrong lines. And I think that's possible, that he is drawing the divide on the wrong lines. What I think people tend to do, and I had a similar thought about him, Ryan. I think what people tend to do is they'll sort of look at things from their own vantage point and assume that the world is working from that same, and just that becomes their fixation. And again, to his credit, he recognizes that, he could be wrong on everything that he's saying. He's just trying to figure things out. And what I think a lot of what we as humans tend to do very frequently is we get very locked in to what we are, to the analysis that we're accustomed to assessing things. So if you're an economics guy, you're going to be focusing on how the economy dictates how history unfolds. Whereas if you're more of an army individual, if you're more military geared, you're going to basically focus on that element of things. If you're more of a sociologist, you're going to focus on that element of things. And basically, and you could probably take any one of those perspectives and make a cogent argument to prove your point. Does that mean that that's really what's driving everything? Or is it that's what you're looking for? So you're looking for those certain benchmarks to come to your conclusion, and you can find it, and sometimes it might not fit perfectly, and you sort of have to massage it in there a little bit to sort of make your point fit. And that's what happens because you're trying to basically, in other words, and he massaged it. Where did he massage it? That he's like, well, this doesn't really apply to the two world wars we had. Well, that's a pretty significant miss, right? I mean, those are pretty significant incidents. So it's it doesn't really fit with those four things. Really can tell a lot, but it kind of misses those two pesky world wars, which are kind of exceptions to the what? What? Now that being said, that doesn't mean that there isn't truth to what he's saying as well. So you shouldn't get locked into okay, the whole world wars thing. The point is there's a lot of different factors. So now, and you can see how if you were to, okay, you could have things escalate into a world war in the ways that we saw with, different axes and power consolidations between different nations, ultimately pitting against each other, which is how World War I started. You could look at it, the economic issues and the lack of self-respect that Germany felt, and the economic pressures that were caused by the Depression with respect to World War II. I mean, you can look at a lot of different factors, and I actually think that our universe is sufficiently colorful that, and this is going to be the religious perspective on things. I think God basically has a lot of weapons in his arsenal as to how to trigger things if he's so inclined. And he can trigger it via economy, he can trigger it via plague, he can trigger it via ego, or hate. It's just infinite numbers of ways. I think there's a lot of different weapons in God's disposal. And that's how I look at it, because I'm looking at it from the religious perspective. So you know, so that's why I'm saying, like, I wouldn't call him wrong in what he's saying, or saying that this is not something that's could be similar to what we've seen happen in the past. You don't need to have, let's say, a population explosion before that leads to ultimately to war. There could be other ways that lead to war, but a population explosion is one way that we get there, and that's the way that's threatening us in the present, if that makes sense. So limiting inequality to limit progress. That's not what I don't think he's making that ad. I don't think he's trying to advocate for an agenda here. I think he's trying to make assessments. I don't think he's arguing for particular direction. I haven't heard him advocating for anything like that as of yet. I don't think that, you see, I understand why you're reading that into what he's saying, but I'm saying, like, I don't look at him as he's saying, here's the solution is get rid of X percent of the population. He's simply making an assessment. Meanwhile, Mike Rowe is shouting from the rooftops about the 30,000 well-paying, dirty jobs people don't want to do. Yeah. It's most of the people that vote blue, Joe. No. Most of them are miserable. He's going to talk about that, too. Why does this look like the Bored Ape Yacht Club logo? I've never seen the Bored Ape Yacht Club. Now I got to look that up, though. Now I got to see it. What is that? That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. I can't answer your question, Chicken, but I see where you're coming from.
Okay, so all of that makes sense. The only thing is it all hinges on this idea that we have an increase in supply of labor that is more than we need right now. But everything that I'm looking at says that we have a massive demographic problem in that we have a ton of old people and we don't have the young people to support them. We have just rapidly declining populations.
Yeah.
So if you had said this is a declining population problem and we can't support the old people, I would have understood. But you're saying that instead it's an oversupply of labor. How's that true?
So that's a great question, because it leads me to the point I was trying to get to, where I say that there are actually two crises going on hitting us at the same time. The first is this demographic issue I described. And then the second one is the population crash. And we're having both of these at the same time. And so the crisis that I described before, it's a natural historic cycle that occurs every 250 years. I'm going to call that the secular cycle, because that's the term for it. And the other thing, which is something I've teased out in the last 2 years, I give it a variety of names. I call it Mouse Utopia. I call it the psychological Black Death. I call it a variety of things. And what I found there is that this very, very stark population crash, where if the current demographic trends continue, there will be 6 Koreans for every 100 alive today. And that's the pattern among every single industrialized country, where the birth rate is crashing faster than anyone thought was physically possible. And these computer models have pretty wide standard deviations. And so it's crashing faster than any of the computer models predicted. And that's a scary thing in of itself that almost no one talks about seriously in our society. And so we are unlucky to face 2 demographic crises at the same time, where I say that the secular cycle is hitting because at all the variables, wages have stagnated to the point where a majority can't pay a $1,000 emergency bill, and 40% can't pay a $400 or $500 emergency bill. So people are barely getting by. Quality of life statistics have crashed. People can't afford to have families. There's massive inequality. There's massive political polarization. So all of the variables that I would use to predict the secular cycle are happening. And we have a de facto oversupply of labor, but then aging is about to hit us like a truck. And so both of these will get entangled inside the other. And one of the biggest issues that we would get with aging is that you have a smaller population of producers versus a larger population of dependents. And that's an ugly situation to deal with, because whenever the pie
because today's young generation sucks. But the reality is that at a certain point, we're all going to depend on them. That's just the reality. You can hate on them all you want. At a certain point, we're all going to depend on them. And that's what's so scary.
shrinks, people get violent.
Yes, they do. But how did we get an oversupply of labor while the population was crashing?
So we have an incredibly bizarre demographic curve. It's like nothing we've seen before. So the world's population in 1940 was a little over 2 billion. We're past 8 billion now. So what we saw was the quadrupling of the world's population in less than a century. And so from that, our elite has done literally everything it can do to increase the supply of labor. And these are complex things that are both good and bad, but they all, on a statistical basis, increase labor. So America's population has more than doubled since World War II through natural population growth. The US has taken in something like 50 million immigrants. We've globalized our economy, so we're doing labor competition with Malaysia and Mexico and China. And automation's one of the really huge ones that people ignore. Automation's removed a lot of labor supply. Women's entrance to the workforce is another. So all of these variables have increased the supply of labor. And Peter Turchin looked at the statistics on this. And so we are in this absolutely bizarre bulge that crashes. And so the demographics are remarkable, where the world's population increased on an L curve. It's insane. And then it immediately crashed. And so we are dealing with things that historically should probably happen over the course of 500 years in like a 150-year time frame. And that's due to the social effects of the Industrial Revolution, where you have rapid population increase, but then for complex reasons, urban societies can't replicate their population. So you have these rural populations form into cities with health and infinite food and all that stuff, but then those cities can't replicate. And so if you want to look at England, for example, England in the pre-industrial world had a population of like 10 million people. Now it's up at like 60 million. And then in 50 years, it's going to crash precipitously. And so things are happening so fast that you can have we have an oversupply of labor now, but then it's going to start crashing very quickly. And so there are a lot of other weird variables, like AI is kicking in, a lot of automation is getting worse. And so we're getting slammed by a change of a massive, and so I don't think in 20 years there's going to be an oversupply of labor, but as of now, just looking at the wages, it's true.
Okay.
What do you guys think? I was sitting here, and there's like so much to digest in what he says. So you're basically saying, right now there's a massive oversupply of labor, and that's about to crash down where there's an undersupply of labor. I mean, that could be that, and that's the cycle in the economy, which means that wages will go up significantly. This is why the government should never try to control the economy. There's just too many factors for them to ever be able to account for. And whenever they try to influence it, they just make things worse. They really just make things worse. You heard it here, folks. Industry is the ultimate blue falcon. Get poor so you can bust nuts and guts. New alpha male strategy. No, I didn't hear that in what he was saying. The world population went up in many of the countries with low GDP because they were traditional farming style. Now they're going through equalization. He was saying that people don't reproduce as much when there's a low GDP. What was the claim he was making? Denise Barrett Boy says, first impression, I Marxian view, identify two classes struggling in some synthesis to emerge, ignores moral decay of Rome, betting against God as root flaw. Fear of the Lord is beginning of knowledge. I agree with you on that completely. He's actually about to get into the whole religion thing. In about like 10 minutes or so, he starts talking about religion. And from what I took, when I stopped in the middle of that portion, he was actually saying that we need more religion in order to be a healthy society, which is not what you would expect someone from his demographic to come to. Joe, James O'Keefe got a spicy tweet he just posted about Google and election interference. Let me check out his spicy tweet. I take it you're asking me to check out what O'Keefe just tweeted out.
Go to 10X Studios. If you guys don't think election interference is real in 2024, I want you to watch this video. So we run a campaign and we're showing our viewers what they're going to get when they go to 10X Studios. The ad got flagged as ineligible. So you cannot run this ad. It doesn't fit our campaign. So we went back and we looked at it and said, oh, it's a picture of Donald Trump in there. Let's take him out and replace that image with Miss Harris. And I'm being polite when I say Miss Harris. We then sent it back to Google. We just simply replaced the Trump thumbnail with a thumbnail of her and a new title. And they approved it. Election interference, Google, you guys are nasty people. If you guys don't think election interference is real in 2024, I want you.
Not surprising at all. She's really for the middle class, though. Google really is looking out for the middle class. Horrifying. Don't worry about it. It's going to be a runaway. It's going to be a landslide. Stop worrying.
We are setting a very complex table.
Yeah.
So just to plant some flags for the audience.
That is a good moment for me to just tell you all this. Tuesday, September 10th, is the debate. That starts at 8 o'clock. I will be having an early show that night. I will be live streaming the debate. I will be providing my unique perspectives about the debate live for you as the debate is going on. I urge each and every one of you to join me in my live coverage of it. I am torn because I've been invited a couple of places for the debate. One of them is an X space. I'll probably be invited to a couple of X spaces. My question is, do you want me to join in that X space? And, I can basically mute myself and talk to you and mute them if the need arises.
Good evening, everybody.
Or should you heard that because I'm about to make a poll. So would you rather me be solo or would you rather me be on an X space? So I'm going to have Joe should cover debate solo. Part of X space. I'll have add or bring on one guest. Joe will be on time. I actually think I'm going to start a little early. Thank you for your belief in me, Mr. E. I appreciate that. And I'll hear from you guys also in Rumble. If you want me to do it solo, put a 1. With a partner, put in 2, and part of a panel, put in a 3. 1 for solo, 2 with a partner, 3 for panel when I'm part of a group. And when I have it as part of the group for the actual debate part itself, I'll probably mute it out, but just jump back in with them right afterwards. So that's the only way it makes sense. So 1 for solo, 2 for partner, 3 for group. That's Grant Cardone. He's a Scientologist. Oh, yes, I will be. Thank you much. Grant Cardone is an OT8, the highest form. I don't know what that is. The highest form of Scientologist? Okay. Spark. Okay. Let's get back into it.
Really fast, because I obviously coming into this have done a fair amount of research. Okay, so what you have is the incredible population swell that you were talking about that brings in way too much labor. But on top of the population swell, we also introduce women to the labor force, which already just doubles, not quite.
I'm seeing a lot of 1s and 3s in Rumble, by the way.
Doubles, but has a massive impact on that. We're going to go through the thing you just went by quickly, which is that cities have some natural inbuilt mechanism that sort of self-destructs their population growth, which is the whole mouse utopia, psychological Black Death, which will be next on our list. But just for now, dear audience, know that the belief on the table is that as you bring people together in cities, it is a natural occurrence, a predictable occurrence, that the birth rate will begin to drop and they will create their own population. We also have something that we haven't put on the table yet, but I know is a big part of your thesis, which is as the left-leaning people take power, morality and religion, things that have kept us in check and kept the sexual tension between men and women, that goes away and is replaced with kindness. And kindness, oddly enough, has this wildly self-destructive quality. And so we'll be getting into that. Okay, so that's the sort of looming.
What? I skipped that part of it. What? More kindness without God? What? No. Oh my God, no. Oh my God, no. It's a twisted kindness. I gotta hear it. Now I gotta hear it. Now, see, this is what every time I was like, all right, let me hear the rest of it.
Thing, so that a lot of people, certainly people my age, are like, what do you mean, bro? This is awesome. Younger people are like, how can that old asshole say that? Like, this is the worst thing ever. And so now what we have to walk through is why the discrepancy between my generation, I'm a Gen X, so why the discrepancy in perception between Gen X and Gen Z, and what does that tell us about what you call the psychological Black Death?
Yes. For everyone in the audience, I'm a Zoomer. I'm 23. Most people overestimate my age, so I was going to throw that out. And I mean, there's a discrepancy because the difference is huge. I mean, you're looking at, people forget charts are real. They look at the numbers in the chart and they forget that it actually has to affect them. I see this with economics a lot. People are like, yeah, we can just like money printer go burr, which is a meme of basically the government printing infinite money, and they forget that there's an end result to it. But so the baby boomer generation has this more so than Gen X people. And I'm sure you'd agree with that, where if you want to look at the baby boomers, the entire economy has been geared towards their self-interest for their whole lives, where people forget this. In 1960, the average age was 25. Half the population was under 25 in 1960. Now it's around 40. And so when the baby boomers were growing up and starting families and getting jobs, we had the highest wages of any period ever in history. And so, and that was caused by America having this huge industrial advantage due to the world's wars. And so over time, though, as the baby boomers became adults, it continued to reflect their self-interest, where we moved from a wage-based economy to a capital-based economy. And so we see that with the Reagan Revolution and Thatcher, the liberalization, because when the baby boomers were growing up, America had an economy to the left of like Denmark today. And then we removed that. And then we saw the opening up of capital. And so 1980 until 2020, due to this global huge baby boomer generation saving up money for retirement, you just saw massive amounts of money. And so this was the period the most people ever were lifted out of poverty between 1980 and 2020. And so because all that boomer capital supported the third world, and now as the boomers are retiring, the money is being taken out of the economy to pay for their retirement. So because the boomers were in this very decisive
to pay for their retirement, it's not going to Ukraine, because that's where it feels like it's going. It's not going to, like, it's not going for alphabet programs, because that's where it feels like it's going. It's not going to fund Planned Parenthood, because that's where it feels like it's going. I don't know. See, this is such an interesting perspective. Really? Really? See, this actually comes across to me as like envy that they did well, and this is our society today is not doing as well. Like, how dare they spend it on themselves? Do you need God to understand real kindness? He looked into the enlightening thing and created the universe. Yeah, this is true.
Strategic point in this demographic boom. And you guys should check out Peter Zeihan. He talks about this stuff very eloquently. The boomers were able to first get good wages, then use the government to secure a capital good economy, and then after that use the government to support retirement. And so as of now, the governments of the world are doing the most money printing of any period ever in history, or money printing and debt, where it took us all the time from the revolution to 2014 to reach the amount of debt we had in 2014. We've doubled it since, because our ruling class or boomers, the incentive is, let's print a lot of money so that we can retire comfortably, and then we'll be dead so our kids don't have to deal with it.
I think it's more a matter of that I'll be empowered just by giving people what they are telling me to give them, rather than I won't be the adult in the room. I'll be the one giving out candy. I'll be the stranger giving out candy rather than being the adult in the room. I feel like there's a cowardice amongst our leadership to tell people, you know what, things are going to suck for a bit, because if you do that, you don't win elections. Because the next person running against you says, look how things have sucked under him. Why would you want more of that when I'm offering you candy? So there's a fear. There's a fear of saying things are going to suck for a bit, because you have to have the cojones to say, I don't care about getting reelected. I'm doing this to fix things for the long term. And that requires a certain type of bravery, which is all too uncommon in politics today. So now the last generation control over you, except if you guilt them to support you, cancel culture works. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They keep getting guilted. On locals or on X. You can just throw in the timeline on locals.
It's incredibly cynical, but it is in their direct self-interest.
AI might be the most important new computer. It costs or so is S, doing it correctly, boom plus. Okay, so that's how the boomers got into the position that they're in. But a stat that I've heard you throw out is, if I'm remembering it correctly, that Gen Z has 90% less buying power at the same age that boomers had. So call it your mid-20s.
Yes.
That obviously is brutal, especially when paired with another stat, which is whenever the average age of marriage hits 28, you're going to have a revolution. And we're at 29 right now. So
I don't know.
This is why we have to walk
this is an interesting thing, that it's like people will notice some weird sort of statistic like that. When the average age of marriage reaches this older age, that's when you have. It's like such a weird thing to fixate on and come up with. That I'm just like, is it A is causing B? Do you think that there's a causation factor rather than a correlation factor? And maybe they're not saying it's a causation. I don't think they are saying it's a causation factor. But like, if there's a correlation, then you should try to figure out what the causation is for both of them. Right? In other words, when you have the difference between a causative factor and a correlative factor is the example that they give us in law school is that people who drive motorcycles have two factors about them which are different from people who never drive on motorcycles. Number one is they tend to have tattoos. Much more so than people who do not ride motorcycles. Number two is they tend to die more frequently in motorcycle accidents. So their death in motorcycle accidents is a cause that you can see that their driving motorcycles is a causative factor in dying via motorcycle accidents, as opposed to it's not a causative factor of them having tattoos, right? So the death is the motorcycle riding is a causative factor to the death. It's a correlative factor to the tattoos. So when things have a correlative factor, which is what they're describing here and now, that when the average age of marriage rises above 28, you tend to see more war. Okay, or more societal collapse. Okay. Are those causative or are they correlative? I would argue that even if it's correlative, you can sort of look at things that are correlative and say, well, what does make these two things tend to correlate? Why would the average age have an impact on societal, what factors would be driving both of them? Both the age increase and the societal collapse. And there might be one factor, which is a causative factor of both those correlative elements. The same way someone feeling a need to rebel might feel like, okay, a motorcycle is a way to show my freedom and independence, and having a tattoo is a display of my independence. So then the need for independence is causative of both of those two correlative factors. See what I'm saying? So, well, let's hear how this plays out here.
The psychological Black Death, Mouse Utopia as your mental model for how all of this stuff plays together. I think this is really interesting. And this was the part that, as I was researching you, really forced me to confront my own views of how the world works, basically. And this whole walkthrough certainly helps me understand the left in a new light.
Yes.
And it'll be very interesting to hear you walk through this. So what is the psychological Black Death, and how is it tied to the discrepancy between boomers and Gen Z?
Firstly, I want to thank you that you've put the effort in to actually explain the logical course of the ideas. I get that very rarely on podcasts. Most podcasts, I just jump around from idea to idea. So our conception of human nature is completely wrong. And the video I just it's being edited right now is the anthropology of the left. Then I'm going to write the anthropology of the right. Then the video hopefully I'm going to write after that, or maybe a video after that, is The Greatest Lie Ever Told. And The Greatest Lie Ever Told is the complete fabrication on the information of human nature from what I call the blue pill era. The blue pill era is 1960 to 2020. And the blue pill era believed these, let's say 10 things. They're just completely false. Progress will continue forever at no cost. Men and women are psychologically the same. There are no genetic differences between race, sex, or class. That there is.
I want to write these down, because the first one I actually still believe that progress will continue.
And the blue pill era believed these, let's say 10 things. They're just completely false. Progress will continue forever at no cost.
I don't know what that means, at no cost. I guess, that it won't harm society that we have progress. I think that's possible.
Men and women are psychologically the same.
Not at all true. They are not at all the same. Very different.
There are no genetic differences between race, sex, or class.
Which is a joke. That's also obviously BS.
That there is, that human nature is naturally a blank slate that you can just write whatever you want onto. That human.
I think that's stupid. Also, there are very strong predispositions that humanity has. I use this all the time. I actually brought this up when I was in my early days when I was talking about the alphabet community. But let's see. I agree with him with that. That is something that they try lying to us about a lot. You see, he's exposing the flaws in the left. This is why I say I don't think he has an agenda here, at least not a purposeful agenda. I don't think he's cognitively got an agenda that I want to push this perspective. I think he's genuine. I feel when I'm listening to him a certain intellectual integrity where he's genuinely trying to figure things out. So, because this is an attack on every leftist perspective out there, what he's saying here and now.
Nature is perfectible.
I don't know if it's perfectible, but we have a duty to try perfecting it. If that makes sense. Perfecting ourselves. That's part of self-growth.
And that we are gradually moving towards global unity. These are
that's also pretty stupid. That's also pretty stupid.
Things that because society was ludicrously wealthy, we believed the things we wanted to hear because there was no pressure to believe the unpleasant truths. And so I've invented an acronym called SAW, and SAW stands for Studies in Ancient Wisdom. And so there's this huge convergence of social science since the start of the 21st century with what every previous society in history believed. And when you're one of my friends has got a saying, if you're the only sane man in a madhouse, you're the crazy one. And so when 99% of human generations disagree with us, we should think about whether or not we're wrong. And so
see, this is something that, I saw that in the intro and I was like, amen, amen, amen. Maybe at least consider the possibility. Consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this new innovation you came up with as far as how humans think and work and operate, maybe it's not right. Maybe, just maybe. Things need to suck for a bit in order to reset our economy. Society is going to hurt, but it's needed. Yep. Notice they forgot you. Gen X in the middle of boomers and Gen Z. Sorry, our generation is, I argue, the greatest generation. Huh? Where was I at?
not we're wrong. And so what Saul has consistently found is the factors that matter the most for personal happiness are relationships and religion. And so if you view modernity as the removal of relationships and religion, everything else, all the massive wealth, all the safety, the health is a side effect. And it's clearly true because, I mean, we are the wealthiest, or until 5 years ago or 10 years ago, we were the wealthiest, safest, most hygienic, whatever society in history, but our society is miserable. Listen to the pop culture, listen to the speeches the politicians get, read the literature. For every single cultural form you could analyze your society through, we are miserable. And so that demonstrates that our previous assumption that if you improve people's material conditions, they're going to get happier. And I am going to jump. So actually, how am I going to say this? Would you prefer I start the psychological Black Death or Mouse Utopia?
Knowing that they're nested, dear audience, we'll start with Mouse Utopia.
One of the things I like to say is that I said before that I think there are two crises that are hitting our world, the secular cycle and Mouse Utopia. And I say that, like, I have made hundreds of hours of.
I've heard him say that phrase several times, and I'm still not sure whether he's saying mass or mouse. I'm still not sure. At this moment, I don't know if he's saying mass utopia or mouse utopia, because it keeps sounding like mouse utopia, and that's a phrase I've never heard before. Mass utopia, I could try to figure out what that means, but I don't. What are you guys? Is he saying mouse or mass? Just got here. Did I just hear an argument for everyone else is wrong and I'm right? No, he's saying that maybe you should question that perspective. How you doing, Master Phillips?
Content, trying to explain both of those crises. And so you're trying to intuitively figure out an event that will only make sense in retrospect, where historians, before a historic event happens, it's difficult to explain. If you explained the world wars to someone in 1900, they think you were insane. And so that's how the world works. And so psychological Black Death is a theory that I invented myself.
By the way, that's the same reason that I always say that if I'm dealing with a crisis or a problem, it's so much more difficult for me to assess the best route out of there than if I hear anyone else dealing with that exact same problem. And I sort of look at it as if like you're in a forest, and it's like, which direction do I go? Do I go north? Do I go south? Do I go, southwest? What? And you might be, and you don't know that one way you're going deeper into the forest, and the other way you'll be out of it in 3 minutes, because everything just looks the same no matter which direction you look. So it's like when you're living through history, you can't really assess history. It's very, very difficult to actually assess it in a way that's, when you look back on it, you'll be able to have a healthy perspective because you're in the forest. And when you're in the forest, there's just no way to know. But and that's why, I'll if I'm trying to struggle with, if I find myself struggling with a particular circumstance, I'll try to find someone whose perspective I trust, because when I'm helping someone else, I'm outside the forest, and it's like I'm standing, I'm like 1,000 feet in the air, seeing where they are. I'm like, oh no, you just gotta skip over that little stream there, and you'll be or go up walk up another 0.3 of a mile, and you'll see that there's this bridge there that you can go over. But if you're in the forest, you have no idea that there's a bridge there.
And I found it from looking at actually Zoomers, because Zoomers have such stunningly poor mental health that it scares me. And I'm 23, and people my age, a lot of them, they can't go on phone calls with themselves. They can't go to the doctor themselves. It's difficult for them to work a job. They can't date. It's just, they're completely dysfunctional as individuals. They have crippling anxiety, and the mental health statistics for Zoomers are horrifying. I think like 80% of Zoomers are lonely. 80% have anxiety. Like a quarter have a diagnosed mental condition. And for women, the numbers are horrifying. If you want to look at women at the age of 25's mental health, you'll need a shot of vodka. And so I know a lot of these people myself, and I've been in a couple of different weird positions where I get to interview a lot of young people. And it's just, once you interview young people with their lives, you realize there are very serious mental health issues that are just ignored, and no one's got a good paradigm for it. So I was trying to go back and figure out, why do young people have such horrible mental health? And this is something John Haidt has looked into. John Haidt's one of my favorite authors. I definitely recommend you guys read all his books. But one of the biggest issues our society has is that we think human nature is this like Roblox that you build. You put a brick here, you teach the kid algebra, the kid remembers algebra. You put the kid into Chinese classes, the kid's going to remember Chinese. And human nature and so we view human nature as a machine to cut up, and it's really a garden you cultivate over years. So for people or children, you have to put them in a setting where they can play, where they can make friends, where they have a belief structure. And these kinds of structures, they create psychological stability so that people can be creative and develop. And this is something
they're grounded. That's what religion does. That's one of the reasons that absence of religion is so difficult, because you need to find something else to moor yourself to. Otherwise, you're adrift. And it's like, when you have people have such a deep rejection of religion, so instead they just float out into like nowhere and don't have anything to tether them as to what has any semblance of truth, versus being completely insane. And that creates anxiety when you feel as if you're completely untethered from anything. He's actually hitting on the massive issue that plagues Zoomers. It's a massive issue that plagues them. So instead, they try tethering themselves to either other people and gaining social acceptance and recognition through social media, or similar to that, becoming part of a cause or different causes that, are, that they can sort of embrace, even if those causes sound entirely stupid and self-destructive. But if they recognize that it looks self-destructive, then they have nothing to tether themselves onto, and they feel completely adrift. So they're sort of stuck, tethered onto this ridiculous perspectives. And that's how you can have millions of people all of a sudden saying, like, oh yeah, it makes total sense that a person's born in the wrong body and that they need to, we need to cut off their genitalia, because they have nothing. They have nothing to ground themselves on. And they firmly believe it. And it becomes their religion, because religion is a grounding spot for most people. And it's one of the values to religion which has been completely dismissed as being trivial, insignificant towards finding your own happiness. But it's an essential part of religion. And it really almost, for the purposes of finding grounding, the religion, having the religion is the grounding. And in the religion might be Islam, it might be Christianity, it might be Judaism, it might be whatever. But that is the grounding. And yeah, and without it, you have no grounding at all. And you're just floating. And that creates a tremendous anxiety. Because there's no truth. There's nothing is true. And anyone who's attacking whatever truth you're attaching to, this is why they're so difficult to sway on any sort of logic-based argument, because you develop an emotional attachment to this new thing that you have, because you have to have that emotional attachment. If you don't have the emotional attachment to it, if that gets overturned, you're not grounded to anything anymore. So I have to believe that, this crazy belief that knowing that, there's an infinite number of types of ways of being a woman. It becomes their new religion. And I don't mean religion as far as something that they worship. It's the grounding element to religion. That's what gives them their sense of grounding. So they don't look at it as if they're worshiping it, but it is the sense of it gives them a sense of who they are and what belief system they actually have. It's Mouse Utopia experiment is a famous social science experiment. I missed that class. Noah Weinberg said the West is decadent because it confuses comfort for pleasure, which is why pain must be avoided versus being the price. True. He's a brilliant man, Reverend Noah Weinberg. Is that Dwight Schrute's understanding of beings? He does look a lot like Dwight Schrute. How you doing, Kiki? Did you have a good day today? Did you have a good day? Let me see if you had a good day today. Let me see if Kiki had a good day today. She's in the league. Let's see. But I didn't have a good day in this league. I had a good day in my other league. Not in this league. Amanra, you broke my heart. Look at this. That's not the way it's supposed to be. 0 left to play. Amanra. The only reason I'm not too depressed is because I actually found that I have J.K. Dobbins, and I'm like, okay, next week I'm going to be clicking all cylinders, and I'm going to start putting up 150 points a week. So I'm not really that bothered by it, just like a little bum for today. But let me see how you did today. Oh, I don't know what name you took. I love rock and roll. Deep State Marauders. Joe Sound Guy. Man, 155 points this week. Dang. All right. Causes like, for example, yes, a cult is a very healthy thing. That's why cults become popular, by the way. It is, all jokes aside.
Forgotten. And so when I was growing up, for example, and my parents weren't like this, not out of any principle, they just didn't, where I knew lots of kids where their parents would walk them to school every single day. They'd walk them 4 blocks to school until they were 18, or they'd read their texts until they were 18, or control their spending money, or they were going to go to college they were going to move to the state their children were going to college to follow them there, or walking them to job applications. Whoa. And so this is a huge issue, and it hits the ruling class the hardest. So these issues are the worst among Ivy League kids, among people at the top companies, etc. And so I look at this is something the elite, not the elite everyone ignores, but for me, it's an elephant in the room. That how the hell are these kids supposed to like fight against the Chinese? How are they supposed to build new railroads? How are they supposed to start families in economic situations? And so I tried to figure it out, and the conclusion I came to is that humans were very much tied to the environments we grew up in. And so, for example, when I had a researcher, I paid him to figure out the underlying statistical drivers for populations that have reproducible birth rates. And so you need to have 2 things to have a sustainable population. So those are, you need to be a rural and a religious society. And this goes back to the ancient world. In the Middle Ages, cities couldn't reproduce. In the Roman world, cities couldn't reproduce. And so for all of history, keep in mind, pre-industrial world, 90% of humans live in small, intact social communities where everyone knows each other, where there's this shared sense of community. And the most industrial societies are the inverse. They're 90% urban. And so we as humans have never evolved for urban societies. And so what happens once you hit the urban society and you passed...
And we can't. That's the problem.
Dunbar's number is 130 people. It's the number at which you can... at which you know everyone in your village. And so there's a unit in the military that's 130 people, Roman centurion, the average company, the average church size. All of these numbers crest around 130 because that's the size a human mind can comprehend. And once you get past that number, you can't hold people to social standards, and people get very lonely. And so there's not this, once you get past that number, it becomes impossible to enforce social standards. The cities of Italy in the 14th century were atheist. In the ancient and medieval world, back in the Greeks and the Romans, that was true too. And so
this is why I say, by the way, in Israel, they have what are called kibbutzim. Kibbutzim is plural for the word kibbutz, which means, translates as gathering or communities, and they're very socialist, where you're part of a community, and it's pure socialism. And when I say, and these kibbutzim have thrived for a long time, and the reason that they can thrive is because they're relatively small. And when you're going to work as a teacher, you feel a sense of satisfaction in it, in the sense that you're teaching Don's kid, you're teaching Gilad's kid, you know everyone. Everyone knows everyone. And yeah, okay, I don't mind doing this for you, and I'm going to do a good job for you because I know that Don next week is going to be fixing my car, and Gilad's going to be taking care of medical issues. So like you sort of all recognize each other. Those type societies, yeah, you don't need to have money. You can have a socialist society, and that'll work fine on a very small scale because everyone knows everybody. When you're dealing on large scales, citywide scales, state scales, or country scales, it's disastrous, and that's where you have failed communism. That's where Marxism fails.
Cities and countrysides create this duality where the city is creativity, it's
Now, I'm thinking something about the Universe 25 iteration of an experiment with mice. Depressing but fascinating results. Check it out. Seems relevant to this. I assume he's going to get to it. I'm assuming he's going to tell me what Mouse Utopia is.
The ability to have cosmopolitanism, it's libertine. The countryside is stable, kind of bigoted. It's very community oriented, not as creative, but they create this duality. And so what happens when you go overnight from a 90% rural society to a 90% urban society is that you have a burst of creativity from putting all these rural people together in cities. And then after that, they lose the replicability. And so you see population crash. And so, for example, we can track this today, where the reason America has one of the most stable birth rates of any developed country is America is the most rural and religious society. And those are the same things. Almost basically every urban society in history is either agnostic, atheist, or doubting, and every rural society is religious. And so it creates this duality. What happens once you get urban societies is you lose the ability to maintain communities, religion, and socialization, because
the reason, by the way, is when you're depending on like your ability to grow food and you recognize the miracle of taking a seedling and turning it into food, and how you need everything to work just right in order for that seedling to turn into a tasty pumpkin, you become more religious. It's true. It's true. You're like, please, God, make my crops grow. Not too little rain, not too much rain, healthy nutrients, no pestilence of different bugs that are going to basically be infesting it. You become a lot more religious. You do. As opposed to when you're amongst creative people, you're basically like, we are the gods. Who needs God? I came up with this idea. Or Jim came up with that idea. Or Jennifer came up with that idea. We are the gods. So you can understand why a rural society would have a much more natural inclination towards recognizing God than an urban society.
You just end up in anonymous environments, and then this results in breakdown of ability for social cooperation. It results in massive psychological issues stemming from lack of socialization and loneliness. It stems from basically humans didn't evolve to be in urban societies.
I'm actually unfamiliar with those. I haven't, from what I heard, most of them have done well, but could be there are exceptions. I don't know.
And so I predicted that we would see this psychological crisis. And my
point is that not that they all will survive, is that they have a chance of surviving, as opposed to having no chance and having actually happy, productive lives, as opposed to having no chance. That doesn't mean that some of them won't fail, for sure.
I've gone back in history through previous psychological plagues. And so I say that our society is currently facing a psychological plague.
Okay, so give me what the psychological plague is in 1 to 2 sentences. Super tight.
French Revolution, Stalin, Nazis.
Okay, so you have, let's take Stalin. You have a revolution where it's like the ruling class has gotten out of hand. They're stealing from you, dear people.
Yes.
Let's kill them all, and then everything is going to be great, and we will have a communist utopia, and all will be well. The problem is that people end up pushing back. People don't like to be told what to do. You come in and you say, hey, these kulaks that are a little bit better at farming than you, they must be doing something bad, so let's kill them too. So you kill the kulaks to make sure that nobody has more than anybody else. Equal outcome, everybody. But then the equal outcome becomes starvation because you killed the people that actually knew what they were doing. And now you have a real problem.
Yes.
Okay, so now what I want to get into, because I have drawn from you. In fact, let me lay out what I've taken from you, and you tell me where I go wrong.
Okay. I'm going to pause and check out this Mouse 25 experiment for this Mouse Utopia thing, and we'll see what they're talking about here.
Society that had cannibalism, asexuality, and violence. A society that had collapsed. What's going on here? In 1972, John B. Calhoun detailed the specifications of a utopia designed for mice, built in the laboratory. Every aspect of Universe 25, as this particular model was called, was designed to cater for the well-being of its rodent residents, increase their lifespan, and allow them to mate. There was abundant food, water, and nesting material. The universe was cleaned regularly. There were no predators, the temperature stable. Paradise. Or maybe not. 4 pairs of disease-free mice selected from the National Institute of Health's elite breeding colony moved in on day 1. It took months for the rodents to familiarize themselves with their new world. Then they started to reproduce, and the population increased exponentially, doubling every 55 days. Those were the good times in paradise. Past day 315, more than 600 mice now lived in Universe 25, rubbing shoulders on their way up and down the stairwells to eat, drink, and sleep. Population growth slowed. Young ones found themselves born into a world with far more mice than meaningful social roles. Males faced a lot of competitors to defend their territory against. Many found that so stressful they gave up. Normal discourse within the community broke down, and with it the ability of mice to form social bonds. Lone females retreated to isolated nesting boxes on penthouse levels. Other males, a group Calhoun termed the beautiful ones, never sought sex and never fought. They just ate, slept, and groomed, wrapped in narcissistic introspection. Elsewhere, cannibalism, asexuality, and violence became endemic. Mouse society had collapsed. On day 560, the population peaked at 2,200 mice. A few mice survived past weaning until day 600, after which there were few pregnancies and no surviving young. As the population had stopped regenerating itself, its path to extinction was clear. The mice had lost the capacity to rebuild their numbers. Many that could still conceive, such as the beautiful ones and their secluded singleton female counterparts, had lost the social ability to do so. On day 920 was the last conception. The last mouse died on May 23, 1973, 4 years and 10 months after colonization. Calhoun later said that the creatures had died 2 deaths. The first was that of their spirit and their society. The second death was that of their physical body. It was not the first time the ethologist had built a world for rodents. Calhoun had been creating utopian environments for rats and mice since the 1940s, with consistent results. Overpopulation leads to explosive violence and hypersexual activity, followed by asexuality, self-destruction, and extinction.
Wow.
In his widely cited paper, Population Density and Social Pathology, Calhoun concluded, no matter how sophisticated we are, once the number of individuals capable of filling social roles greatly exceeds the number of such roles, only violence and disruption can follow. He then referred to a phenomenon he called behavioral sink. Behavioral sink is our desire to be in the presence of others, to be conditioned to seek to be near others, and to be drawn to the crowd, in spite of the conflicts that this can generate. Drawing from Calhoun's popular research, social scientists started to call for restrictions on reproduction as the only possible response to the world's rising population. Calhoun himself was more optimistic about our future. He argued, as our physical space declines, we are forced to extend a conceptual space, our network of ideas and technologies. Later in...
All right, so now we have an idea what Mouse Utopia is. I don't really need Calhoun's perspectives on it so much, but at least I have a better idea now as to what they're talking about. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Sounds like the Matrix. All right.
So as I was trying to put together what exactly the psychological Black Death is, I leaned on what you were talking about with Mouse Utopia. So for anybody that doesn't know Mouse Utopia, can you give them that quick primer?
Oh
and
my
then
gosh.
I'll dive in with what I pulled from that.
Mouse.
We just. Okay. Tell us what it is.
Utopia was a study in the 60s that was run about 30 times by Calhoun. And the study was based around the population growth of that time period. And so that was an era when everyone was terrified of overpopulation. And so what happens is they put 9 mice in a container that can hold 6,000 mice. Perfect conditions, no disease, no predators, perfect temperature. What happens each time, the mouse population goes from 9 to 2,000. And again, the cage can hold 6,000. Then it crashes precipitously. And so with that, you see the mice start to break off into different dysfunctional communities. You have, keep in mind, autistic wasn't a buzzword in the 60s, so it was actually what it clinically meant. A lot of mice become autistic, lose the ability to socialize. There's these mice that groom themselves all day, but they don't mate, called the beautiful ones. There are sociopathic mice who just kill other mice. Then there's other mice who lose the will to live, and they end up homeless, wandering around the community, getting attacked by other mice. Mice refuse to have families or breed, and the mice lose the ability to socially cooperate with each other. Female mice become more aggressive, and they attack their own young, and male mice become more feminine. And so what you see is the mice lose the ability to socially cooperate, and each time the mouse population crashed to 0. And because once they stop having children, the community just dies.
Okay, so that is something I think people will see a lot of parallels in, but there's one quote that you have that once you pair that with what you just walked us through with the Mouse Utopia, you begin to really understand how your worldview hangs together. And the quote is, history is a biological cycle. Now, there's something I have said many, many times to people in my university that I want on my tombstone, which is, if I'm going to bring anything to the world, there's one very simple idea, and that is you are having a biological experience.
Yes.
And so when I heard you say, hey, all these bad things, they're actually mediated by a biological response to, call it, society at large. Okay.
Yes.
If that's accurate, it's deeply troubling. I really hope it's not accurate, and I hope that you get proven wrong, because boy, is this horrible. And at the end, hopefully we'll have time where I can tell you where I think we go, based on feelings, and then you can shoot it all down. But okay, so you have Mouse Utopia. By the way, I've heard you say, and it's important that our audience know, this has not been replicated outside of this guy. So this guy ran this experiment a gaggle of times, getting the same result every time. Other people have tried to replicate it. So take it for what it's worth. A lot of these things fail to replicate. Good.
The reason I use Mouse Utopia a lot is that I normally don't go after studies like that, because I frankly don't trust the capability of a single study to create a coherent worldview. The thing I see with Mouse Utopia is that our society has lots of parallels that don't fit historically, that do fit with Mouse Utopia. So, for example, our society is trying to commit civilizational suicide, nihilism, degrowth. A lot of the social movements we have in our society, like feminism, or a lot of, you don't see something that parallels a lot of the social changes we're having today in history, or at least their very muted form. You do see it in Mouse Utopia. So once I got past, let's say, 2022, I started seeing things in the world that I could only find a parallel to in Mouse Utopia. And so with history being biological, one of the quotes I'd like to just keep repeating in future videos is, we're all a bunch of crazy monkeys. I mean, all of us are, most Americans are hairless albino apes. And so once you see humans as animals, and we are, you can view human society as an Animal Planet thing, where I used to watch a lot of nature documentaries as a kid. And so you see there's desert in the grassland. The baboons start killing each other. They fight over mates. And humans use rationalizations to push their biological self-interests. And lots of ideology is basically a masked self-interest for the group. And history is biological. Everything we do is biological. There is also
I don't even know what that phrase means. What does that mean? History is biological. You could say history is economical. History is philosophical. History is sociological. I don't know what any of these things means. History is scientific. Math is racist. That I know. That's proven. That's obvious. Math is racist. I don't know what that means.
Ideas do exist, but I think ideas do exist independent of biology, but sorry, that statement's too complicated. It's both interdependent and dependent. And yeah, I think it's very useful to see all of human history.
Naming price. Joke. You bunch of baboons.
History as a reflection of the crazy animals who live in it.
So I think a quote that you've said that's really important, you touched on it sort of at the edges just a second ago, is society is rationalization, not rationality.
Yeah.
And so once you understand that we're doing a thing and then we come up with a post hoc explanation of why
Jonathan
we did that
Haidt.
thing,
Yes.
but that
That
thing
is
is
Jonathan
actually
Haidt who
driven by
mentioned.
a biological cycle that we call history.
Yes.
Okay, so looking at mouse utopia, your hypothesis goes something like this. The reason that even though the cage would hold 6,000 and we crash every time at 2,000 is that baked into the cake of evolution is a protective mechanism against the ecosystem as a whole, and that you don't ever want one organism to become too successful such that it ends up gobbling up everything and essentially killing itself.
Yes, that's a great point. And we like to think there's always easy answers, but going back through history, there's like 10 things that could have caused the fall of Rome, and what you choose is basically a Rorschach test for what you care about. So you could say that
that's exactly what I said.
That,
I said this before. You can focus on the economic part, you can focus on the religious part, you can focus on the sociological part. That's exactly what I said like an hour and a half ago. And everyone tends to fixate on the things that matter to them. You can focus on the military element. You can focus on power struggles. People tend to focus on the ones that to them seem most relevant, and but that the world is much more colorful. And I said God has a lot of weapons at his disposal for how he gets things done.
Climate change caused the fall of Rome. Changes in military structure, demographics, degeneracy, and there's like 5 other things. And population decline too. And for Mouse Utopia, you can trace it on multiple levels of causation. And for example, if you want to see the Earth as a self-enclosed, basically, I don't want to say conscious, but it is self-adaptive. You want to see it like that, and there's a significant amount of evidence for that. What Mouse Utopia is the natural order basically shutting down one species from getting too powerful, as you said. And so it's comparable to the body, where if one, let's say, viral or cellular clump in your body is growing too fast, we call it a disease or a virus or a cancer. And then the body's white blood cells naturally crush it. And we have this, it comes from Descartes. We have this idea that the soul and the mind is buffered from the body. But the reality is the thoughts we think are reflections of our chemicals inside our body. And so we think what we say is objective, but the reality is that if the chemicals are changing in your body, and if for people who have had physical illnesses, I'm pretty sure you guys can have known this, if what's in your body changes, what's in your mind changes. And so with Mouse Utopia, the scary thing is we would rationalize Mouse Utopia so that every single thing in Mouse Utopia would make it appear to us as if we were making the correct choice. And crazy people don't know they're crazy. That's the problem. If you're stressed, if you're crazy, you're probably not crazy. If you completely believe what you say all the time, even if it's ridiculous, then you might be.
Yeah, distressing but true. Okay, so if that is accurate, and what we have is a biological cycle, sort of a biological kill switch, if you will, that makes it hard for us to grow beyond that, then you start looking at the things that are going on right now, and suddenly the parallels make sense that this is a biological response to the rapid growth. And that biological response is the thing that's creating the secondary crisis that's crashing. So you get crisis number one is the demographic financial crisis of labor ends up becoming too abundant because we were just growing so fast, becomes too abundant. It triggers some sort of, well, the financial thing just triggers inequality, which, as you laid out earlier, is going to create a problem. But then also that rapid expansion trips this switch, and now you begin to get a population decline, which creates a secondary problem, which is you have way too many old people, not enough young people to take care of them. But I think maybe the biggest one, and this is where I want to lay out how I've interpreted your thesis of the psychological Black Death, and I want to see if you agree or if you think I'm crazy. All right, so you said, let's see if I can find the exact quote, that basically, I'll get the quote in a second, but basically the idea being that when you start moving towards this population explosion, it means you're doing well. You don't have these outside threats. When you don't have these outside threats, suddenly the breakdown of traditional norms that we would find in the rural areas, you said rural and religious, those are the things you need for a stable birth rate. So that begins to break down because now women can come into the workforce. They don't necessarily have to have children. And you said, I don't think it was an exact quote, so I'll give you the paraphrase, which was, women need to have kids. They don't need to be pursuing their artistic dreams.
So that's
100% true. 100% true. And it's something the left hates. They hate. You're a misogynist. It's a biological reality. Not all of them. Not all of them. Definitely not all of them. And that's not a knock on people who can't. But philosophically saying that that's like a choice they should be making, and that's a healthy choice for them to be making, it's not reflective of a healthy mindset. I mean, the desire to have children is a healthy thing. The absence of that desire is less healthy. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say, even though I know that if I get clipped on that, I'll be labeled a misogynist by everyone who's, left, who's 2 steps left of me.
That's not what I said. That's what I said the general folk wisdom is for most societies.
Say more.
And, okay, and if 99 generations told us this, do you think that you know better than the first 99 generations? You think you figured it out better than them? You were the one who raised that question before.
So that's not a reflection of societies tend to develop these concepts of social norms that you should follow for society to be stable. And so that's generally the collective wisdom over history. And the collective wisdom for most people over history, unless you're an aristocrat, is like you work and have kids. And so once you get a wealthier society, you move past what that folk wisdom is. And so like another thing I said in that podcast was the collective wisdom for most pre-industrial societies is that you have rigid sexual mores to build up tension between men and women to incentivize men to work, or you have social institutions that make people tough. For example, in Islam, they have a 1-month period where they fast. What I think is going on there is that to force people to fast for a month builds up delayed gratification. And so what cultures do normally is that they build up these social standards, which give them a competitive advantage versus other societies.
And do you think that again, this is a part of a biological loop, or is this, How does that come to be, basically?
Yes, I think it's spiral. And this is something my favorite author, Amaury de Riencourt, says, that history, I call history a twisted mirror. I think of it like DNA, where it's our era of history, and every era of history reflects things from the far past and the far future. And so for our era, I gave the 4 different time periods that I pull us from, and I see it as a parallel. And there's little bits of the parallel. And so it appears as a loop, as if you get these cycles, but the world clearly does change. 2,000 years ago, there was no new world. There was no anti-malaria medicine. And so we do learn things as this continues. Everything we see around us, this city of Los Angeles, the size of Connecticut, it was built up in the last cycle. So you see the patterns return. Every moment is both its own perfect, indivisible second, but it's also infinitely connected to everything else at the same time. And so my attitude is I don't want a strict return to the pre-industrial social norms. We've done all this crazy modern stuff. So let's find a new integration of the old pre-industrial social norms with the current thing, because we've done so much learning through this process.
All right. Before we get to the how do we escape this, I really want people to understand your thesis on how we got here.
Yes.
So like you, I would not just take what I'm about to say and go, cool, this is what we need to go back to, but it is extremely informative, if true, about the way the human mind works. So you and I don't know each other, so I'll tell you the way that I approach the world. I cannot fathom that people don't have one single guiding light, and that single guiding light from where I'm sitting should be, I want to believe things that have a high degree of predictive validity. Yes. So if I believe this thing, it allows me, like the computer simulations you were talking about, they allow me to predict what the outcome of my actions will be at a personal level, at a societal level. I'm going to believe things, not that I can prove, just down to the microbe that this is true. I want to prove that when I believe this, it has predictive validity. So Newtonian physics is actually wrong, but has a very high degree of predictive validity. So anybody that bought into that for however many hundreds of years that stood, I'm here for that. That made a lot of sense until they could get down to the quantum level. There was no way to really believe anything else. Nothing else is going to be useful. So I don't know that what I'm about to say is 100% like this is going to stand for the next 1,000 years as being accurate, but this feels like it has a lot of predictive validity, that you have to keep humans in check, that you need people to have sexual roles, that for humans to thrive, and by thriving, I mean fulfillment, that you are going to, from an evolutionary perspective, make sure that you don't get conquered and slaughtered, which if you're not a student of history, you do not understand how often that happened, where literally Genghis Khan would roll into your city, and at the end of his visit, all of you would be dead except for some of the women, and your city would just be gone.
Pyramids of skulls.
Yeah, literally, just the level of devastation people just cannot comprehend.
Yes.
So there was, on an evolutionary timescale, it really mattered that you were having enough children, that you could replace your population, that you could be strong, that you couldn't just be outbred and conquered. That very simple fact sits at the bottom of what researching your work hit me with. Okay, so if that's true, again, we're tying this to Mouse Utopia. I know that I need a replacement rate. Otherwise, I get population collapse.
Yes.
No, I know waiting for me on the other side, if I grow too rapidly, too fast, I'm going to hit some sort of trigger point that causes this to collapse. Now, I don't think that there's actually a biological kill switch designed to make sure that we don't overpopulate. What I think we're running up against is you stop being rural and you stop being religious.
Yes.
Now, the reason I think that those things are stabilizing forces is when people have maximum freedom, they will not choose to do things that are in the long-term best interest. So for instance, I don't have kids. Why don't I have kids? Because one, I wasn't thinking through any of these problems. And I looked at my life and I really wanted kids, but I wanted to not have kids a little bit more than I wanted to have kids. And so not thinking there's any tie to like, oh, this will be a problem. I'm just like, yeah, word, this is the choice I'm going to make in my life. I know that I have to find meaning and purpose. I will find that in other ways. Okay, we'll set that aside. But now a lot of people start making that choice. And all of a sudden, my wife, who loves that people want to be mothers and have kids, just isn't making that choice. You get a lot of people not making that choice. And the unfortunate long-term consequence of that is that you have a declining population. Now, we'll need to get into immigration at some point, but that will complicate things too much right now. So I'm just going to set that aside. So you get a lot of people that are making different choices, that when we are freed from the shackles of a guy really wants sex, woman leverages sex to get access to protection and resources. And so you have this forever dynamic between men and women, of women going, I'm a sexual gatekeeper, go be cool, go be awesome, go be a great hunter, be a good provider, take care of your kids, do all that. And I'm going to sleep with you. And for the guys, from an evolutionary perspective, it's like, word, that's a good trade. I'm going to go become hardcore so that I can have sex with you. I assure you, that is a huge part of why I became the person I became, because my wife was like, she never said this, but it was effectively, don't you want me to be impressed by you? And the things you're doing right now do not impress me. And so I went hard in the paint.
This is true. What they're saying now is actually true. I agree with what he's saying. That when women were more restrictive about their sexual relationships, it forced men to earn their attention.
To impress my wife.
And there is still that element to it to a degree, but now it's being sold literally for money. OnlyFans. I mean, it's just, and the birth of AI in that element of it is horrifying as to the long-term impacts that could have on society.
And so I realized, wow, she actually made me a better person.
Because it actually would make women, you know, for men who have no interest in reproducing, it makes women redundant. If you have no interest in reproducing, then the better AI becomes as far as replacing women. They're redundant. And quite the contrary, they can be very expensive. I'm not saying this is a knock on women. I want to be clear about that, because that's something that someone could easily twist from the words I was saying. I don't believe that women are redundant at all. I'm simply saying that if someone is walking in with that type of mindset, that's the objective of women, is basically sexual release and not for the development of a family, well, then technology can ultimately make them completely replaceable. Theoretically, it can make men replaceable too. And that's a major shortcoming in this perspective of a lack of feeling a need to self-propagate. Because if you're not looking to self-propagate, then in that case, you can just go do your cool thing that you think is cool for you and forget about the next generation. And I think that's part of the reason that humanity, like every society, much as we have a desire for self-preservation and an instinct and a survival instinct, I think that propagation is part of our survival instinct. There's an instinct to propagate. And we call it a maternal instinct, or sometimes a paternal instinct. General relativity replaced Newtonian physics, then came quantum. All right. General relativity was so wrong. Or it's short-sighted. I had a whole lengthy thought. I don't want to get into this. I really don't want to get into this. But Friday night, I was laying in bed and I had a whole new perspective on Einstein. And I was just like, that's why everyone was wrong about him. Okay. All right. A whole new perspective. I mean, I was just like, do I want to talk about this on air? I'm definitely not doing that tonight. It's not happening tonight. But yeah. Einstein was kind of a simpleton. I'm planning on covering the debate. Happy to join forces if you would like. Most people are telling me, I didn't check out the, let me check out where's my thing at? Solo 41, bring on one guest 45 as part of an X Space 14. Ooh. Wow. Huh. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect the bring on one person thing. I have to make some inquiries. I can't commit. I don't want to commit to that. I'll keep it in mind. I appreciate the offer. Thank you, brother.
Now, I always say she made me a better person in the ways that only a wife can. And by that, I largely mean that she would reward me with enthusiasm and sex and all of those wonderful things when I was acting in a way that subconsciously she could see will lead us to being successful. She wasn't thinking of it like that. It was just, hey, when you're powerful, I find it so sexy. When you're leading, that's so cool, right? All those things. So now you start getting a breakdown of that. So you get women coming into the workforce. You get men now having to compete with more people. You get this massive increase in labor. Wages are starting to go down. Inequality is going up. The sexual gatekeeping, women realize, well, hey, wait a second. I don't need to sleep with a guy. I can get my own stuff. I can make my own money. I can protect myself. The guy starts going, well, wait a second. You want me to die in a war for what reason? Like, I don't get to have sex with anybody. Like, this is not interesting. I think people fail to understand at a biological level how driven by sex men are. And of course, it's complicated. It's the love of a woman. It's the having a partner. It's children, all of it. So I'll round it to sex, but it is obviously that very complicated nest of ideas. All right. Once that begins to break down, now you get the whole weak men phenomena. Women are going their own.
That's so many jokes. So many jokes. So many jokes. But I'll regret them 5 minutes after I say them.
Way. Men are going their own way. And you are now ripe for either just population collapse, being overtaken through demographics by a different culture that doesn't have this problem, or just straight up.
But you think they're wrong on this? You think they're wrong on this? I wasn't even thinking it was clickbait. I was just like, that's just obviously true.
Being conquered. And that is the loop that we see over and over and over that I think your Mouse Utopia and Psychological Black Death so eloquently outline.
Thank you. I think you got that. You nailed it down. And I really want to hammer home on the point that you touched on, that the most important thing socially is balance and having a countervening force. And it's why America became the most successful country in history, because America both has checks and balances inside its government system, but also in its social structure. America has a very diversified elite between different parts of the country, between different social classes. Watch my American Civilization video if you want to know more. Once people are not held in check, they subconsciously start to do crazy stuff. And you can make it too far in the other direction, though. And this is something where I disagree with a lot of conservatives, is I do think the social mores of the pre-Mouse Utopia world were too constrictive. And I look at Asia, and I think we need to form a new synthesis with the things we've learned now with the past. And what happened in Asia, where around 1000 AD, Asia was the most advanced place in the world. India, China, Islam were massively economically, technologically, socially advanced. But then what happened over the course of the Middle Ages is that Asia's societies became too socially constrictive, so it became impossible to be creative. In China was about to have an industrial revolution in the 11th century, and then the government overregulated the iron factories out of existence. Islam had the steam engine. They had a lot of the rudiments of science, and then the Ummah and the church shut that down. And so you need to have this duality. And the reason the West was so successful as a civilization is that it combined this balance of competing different social groups, where in the West, the church, the monarchy, the church, the monarchy, the nobility, and the merchant classes all competed against each other, thus forcing them to act their best. So you have to combine enough social institutions to keep people on their toes, but not so many that you crush and oppress them under the weight of culture.
Episode 3 of Star Trek, the original series, is called The Enemy Within. In that episode, there's a malfunction with the computer. This ties into what they were talking about. There's a malfunction of the computer where Kirk beams up and gets split into two different Kirks. There's the good Kirk, and then there's the bad Kirk. The bad Kirk attacks Yeoman Rand and has a voracious sexual appetite and is, gruff, and nice Kirk is all gentle and soft and kind and, and able to, and far more logical as opposed to acting based on emotion. But soft Kirk is incapable of making decisions. Soft Kirk is just always questioning himself and doesn't have the leadership necessary. And the point behind it is it's the balance of the two sides of the inner nature that we have, which end up forming us into a greater individual. You need to have one keeping check on the other in order to evolve into reaching our potential. And it's essentially what he's describing here. You need to have both elements in order to, let's say, religion versus what he's advocating is you need to have like religion versus science in order to have a healthy balance.
Yeah, striking that balance is hard. So given that religion has been so successful at this, what is it about religion that is the countervailing force that's been so effective?
He's a poor man's Kirk. He's the Ron DeSantis of Star Trek. That's what he is. He's the Ron DeSantis of Star Trek. He's criminally boring, Riker. Criminally boring. Oh my gosh. He's cringy boring.
Religion accomplishes like 10 different tasks that there's the whole neurology to this, but modernity can only really think in boxes, and religion accomplishes lots of things outside of boxes. So first of all, religion creates a goal through which to orient your self-development as a person or a society, where the religion tells you what you should and shouldn't do.
It keeps you moored.
Number two,
tethered.
Religion establishes communities based off social trust, off shared values
Yes.
and moral prescriptions. Number three, religion establishes some, I guess this is still part of one, religion establishes some kind of social standards that you can't cross. And so religion mitigates the worst parts of like tragedy of the commons behavior, where people are behaving in short-term self-interests that hurts the whole group. Number four, religion establishes mystic paths. And this is something we forget about religion, but every religion has a mystic tradition where people go to the spirit world and talk to God and that stuff. And religion does a variety of things between established psychological stability, where it wires people's brains. Religion wires people's brains towards positive. The mind's an ecosystem. Remember, ideas flow through the mind, and the mind can be filled up with ideas in the same way that the human body's filled with different germs. So religion establishes good thought germs in your mind, where for Christianity, as an example, the idea that God loves you and that you will fail, but if you fail, God still loves you and you should keep trying because you're going to fail. That's a good mental loop for your mind to have. And so religion is a combination of establishing good mental germs.
It's good parenting too, in general. In that sense, religion plays a healthy parent. Good parenting is to make your children feel as if, and this is one of the things that I discovered by accident, and I highly recommend as far as healthy parenting. I urge every one of you to embrace this, and I'm not just telling this to you. I've told this to several family members and friends as well. Okay? I'll share with you a quick story. I've shared this once or twice before. It's understanding the difference between love and respect. And you as a parent have a duty to love your children without question, no matter what, no matter how terrible they are. You must love your children. And they don't need to fight to earn your love. They should never feel as if they need to earn your love. If they feel that, they're going to grow to resent you. They will hate you eventually. They'll feel as if you're withholding your love from them. They must always feel your love. That's gifted. Respect, your respect must be earned. And I try to explain this to one of my kids after they got into trouble for the first time in their lives. Serious trouble. Nothing like, earth-shattering like jail or anything like that. But in school, they got in some trouble. And my child looked bummed. What I said to them was, I told him, I love you just the same today as I did 2 weeks ago. And I got a very cynical look back. So I said, my respect for you went down, but you can earn my respect back. But I love you exactly the same as I loved you a couple of weeks ago. That hasn't changed at all. And I'm always going to love you like that because you're my kid. And I got this very cynical look. And I said, this is what I said. I said, you think I'm lying to you. You think I'm saying that because I feel like I have to say that to you. And I don't really mean it, but that I don't really love you the same as I did a couple of weeks ago. And that love and respect are the same. That's what you think. But I'm going to prove to you that you're wrong. So the kid looked at me and said, okay, prove it. So I said, who do you think I love more? At this point in time, I had an infant and I had the kid who was high teens. So who do you think I love more? Do you think I love your oldest sister more or your new infant sister more? Or do you think I actually love them the same? So the kid looks at me and he's like, I think you love them the same. So that's true. I do. And I can't explain how because it's weird to me. There's just different things about them. And I look at them and I'm like, wow, I love this kid so much. And I have a great deal of respect for your oldest sister and zero respect for your infant sister. She hasn't earned it. So you tell me, I love and respect the same? You just admitted to me that I love them the same. And obviously, I have a great deal more respect for your oldest sister than I do for your youngest sister. So you do the math for me. Obviously, the answer is the respect goes up and down. I look at your oldest sister and I'm like, wow, she's an amazing person. She's like an amazing person. I have so much respect. But the love, exactly the same. Same for you. Your respect took a hit. But love, always there. Always will be. I never thought of that until that moment. It was like almost like you get a moment of inspiration at the right moment. Thank God. So, but it's a very, very important thing. And that's a role that religion is able to take as well, where it's like religion is basically pushing you to maximize and bring the best out of yourself without feeling rejected, permanently cast out. And it has a very, very healthy, it's a very healthy way for people to approach life. You have to be motivated, you have to be pushed to draw the most out of yourself, because we by nature are going to be lazy, but not to feel utterly rejected, because that is just disastrous. And then you just have hopelessness, which when you have hopelessness leads towards your own self-destruction, because you just give up and you become one of those, people who just don't care about growth at all. So why should I try growing? I suck. And that's where most of Zoomers are today. Just utter hopelessness. The future is bleak. They don't have any feelings of self-worth. And part of it is, I feel like a lot of their parents gift them respect. No matter how much of a loser you are, I'm going to love you. I'm going to treat you as if you've earned my respect. And any of you have ever read Harry Potter, it's like basically treating your children like they're Dudley. And it's a way of torturing your kids without intending to. Some parents do it because they're just stupid. Some parents do it because they're too cowardly to actually express dissatisfaction. But this is a very important element as far as raising a child in a healthy way. Always, always, always give them unconditional love. But your respect has to be earned. And sometimes it's something you need to sort of push into yourself to recognize that distinction in your own mind when you're looking at your kid. Because a lot of times we will naturally conflate them as well. So when you see your kid doing something, to remind yourself how much you love them, how much you've invested in them, but not to shower them with respect when they're disappointing you.
In your mind, allowing group coordination, and also establishing
participation trophies are torture. That's a way of torturing your kid and making them feel useless, ultimately. It's an award for breathing. It's the stupidest thing in the world. And it's harming the child.
General framework and
I don't want them to feel bad.
Psychological concepts for how the society should be orchestrated.
All right. One thing that I am now beginning to ponder is what huge role the dynamic between the sexes plays. Women anchoring men to want to be better so that they are prepared to serve society, but really they're doing it to get laid.
Yes.
And then it made me ask the question, has Christianity and societies that are Christian in nature, have they been so successful because they get the most men laid?
Let me think about that. So this is a video I've been meaning to make for like a year, and I've had the ability to write it. I just haven't gotten around to writing it. And one of my favorite books.
Oh my God. That might be the funniest question I've ever heard in an interview. That is really funny. That is really funny.
One of my favorite books ever is Sex and Power and History by Amaury de Riencourt. And it's a history of the rise and fall of civilizations from the perspective of the relations between men and women. And so the masculine and the feminine is a proxy for order versus chaos. How a society deals with the feminine is a proxy for how it deals with chaos. So, for example, around 1000 AD, Asia became incredibly restrictive to women, where all the Asian civilizations, Islam, India, China, women were completely shoved out of private life. They had to basically wear burqas. They were forced in the house. And so by giving women so little authority, these societies fossilized. They lost the ability to be creative. Because if you're shoving, it's an archetypal symbol, where if you want to shove the feminine and give it no power, you're going to over-prioritize order. For Western Europe, Western civilization, in the pre-industrial world, almost every Christian society treated women better than almost every non-Christian society. And so Western Europe had the best treatment of women for any pre-industrial society ever. And so what happened was the West had this ability to deal with chaos and creativity, where women were given enough social authority that they could ask men to work harder to appeal to them. And another thing is that the Romans, the Greeks, European societies are monogamous. And monogamy basically creates significantly better societies than polygamy, because more guys get laid. Because what happens with polygamy is the emperor has 100 women, and then every other guy, if the emperor has 100 women, or even more than that, that means there are 99 other guys who aren't getting laid. So they don't have an incentive to cooperate in the system, so they could start wars or become criminals and that stuff. And so the West was able to strike this really good balance of giving women enough social authority that women could hold men accountable. But there was also this social structure of Christianity, of the village, and of social traditions that could keep toxic femininity in check.
All right. What is toxic femininity and how is it manifest in today's world?
We can all...
You never hear the phrase toxic femininity, do you? You hear toxic masculinity all the time. You never hear toxic femininity.
I'll agree that toxic masculinity is a thing, and
No, it's not. It's not a thing at all. There's no such thing. Literally no such thing. It does. So we cannot agree it's a thing. I don't agree at all. I believe what people refer to as toxic masculinity is a sign of lack of masculinity.
Masculinity is, let's say I'm a pirate and I've used my physical force to beat someone up.
Nope.
or it's using social traditions to push male interests at the expense of the society. So with toxic masculinity comes toxic femininity. And I boil down toxic femininity to an acronym called GSR, or gossiping, shaming, and rallying. And so GSR is the use of relational warfare to get stuff. And so an example of it is, let's say a woman wants to get a job and she's not qualified, is that she threatens to say that the job hirer sexually harassed her if she doesn't get the job. And this is something that the clinical research has gone into, and we've proven it, that women will use basically language and shaming to get what they want. And so the whole thing about you should believe, like with Me Too, that you should believe every single thing a woman says, that's ridiculous, because if you establish a principle, people will abuse whatever principles you let them abuse. So if you have a social system where you can't question sexual assault allegations, you end up with just this magical wild card that a woman can pull to push her own self-interests. Or so gossiping, shaming, and rallying, where the way it works is that you establish these kind of ideas that exist as proxies to push your self-interest. And so envy and social ostracization is another example, where something I know a lot of women have talked about is that if you're more attractive or smart or pleasant than other women, is other women will make up lies about you and tell you that you're ugly and try to ruin your life because you're competition. The women who get bullied the most are the most attractive. And so undermining is another aspect of it, or crabs in the bucket thinking, where if you see, and I've made a video at envy, it's an older video, but it's one of my favorite, where if you see someone who's doing well and you try to tear them down, that's an element of toxic femininity, as is overconsumption for social signaling. So if you blow all of your man's money on jewelry to make yourself look better at the expense of the whole family, that's another element of it. So it's gossiping, shaming, rallying, undermining, envy, hyperconsumption, using emotions when logic is necessary, magical thinking of just wishing things happen. So it's this crystallization of negative female behaviors, which are paralleled by the masculine basically being a pirate and beating people up.
Wow.
The masculine's a little easier there to summarize.
Wow. Oh my gosh. You're going to have to like consolidate some of that. Wow. That was something.
Okay, so how is what's going on today feminine?
I told you this was a really interesting chat. This is a really interesting chat. You don't hear chats like this very often. This is a really interesting chat.
Toxic femininity.
Every single thing in feminism is pushing for a woman's self-interest. And feminism left behind the idea of equality, like let's say 10 years ago. And I've seen the definition change 4 years ago. If you were to go on like the dictionary website, they would say feminism is pushing for female-male equality. But now a majority of people in college are women. Among people under 30, women make more money than men, all those sorts of things. And so once they got past equality, it wasn't about quality. And now it's, if you look up the definition, it's for female advocacy. And so, I mean, there's like 15 examples of it. And it's funny that you said it's hard to explain toxic femininity, because that's an element of toxic femininity. An element of toxic femininity is to make it impossible to talk about toxic femininity. And so I have to take forever to explain this, because our society, if we were 200 years ago, we would have a bunch of cultural words where I could just say the word and you'd be like, oh yeah, I understand this concept. But not being able to talk about toxic femininity is an element of toxic femininity, where if you criticize a woman for anything, you can be called sexist. The welfare state, and we don't see it this way, two-thirds of the people who take money in the welfare state are single moms. It's a form of redirecting income from male to female, and you can argue about whether or not that's toxic, but it definitely is the dispossessing of resource. It definitely is the transfer of resources. Me Too is another example. If you ask So we've reached the point where it's basically physically impossible to have expectations of socially sanctioned expectations of a man to a woman. And so a man is still really expected to make more money, to support the family, to be masculine. But if you tell a woman, I'd like you to, let's say the man works a job, the woman doesn't. If you tell a woman, I want you to cook, clean, take care of the kids, that's considered toxic in of itself. And so toxic femininity has been basically the complete abdication. Like, can we think of a single social standard that it's acceptable to hold women to today?
I'm too old, so I would have listed off a whole bunch of things that my generation wouldn't miss a beat on, but I certainly understand what you're saying about
everything
today.
He's
My
saying,
bigger question is,
everything he's saying.
How is
everything he just described now is it's very accurate. Which part of what he said there was wrong? Tell me what was wrong with what he said there. Everything he said there was just fire.
Is it that ideology, whether pushed by men or women, how did that take over so many institutions?
Wonderful question. The bureaucracy. So one of my favorite books ever is The Leviathan and Its Enemies by Sam Francis. And so if you lived in the Middle Ages, you would not know what feudalism is. In the Middle Ages, the nobility owned the land and then they would predate from the peasants. You would just think, this is how the world is. The Lord protects me. I pay rent to the Lord. It is what it is. Leviathan and Its Enemies is that for modern society, where modern society is this bureaucratic blob, and every major institution is a bureaucracy. The government's a bureaucracy. Religious institutions are bureaucracies. The military is a bureaucracy. Corporate America is a bureaucracy. Any single thing you could think of is a bureaucracy. And you think, what kinds of people staff this bureaucracy? And the left is an ideology which rationalizes the continued growth of the bureaucracy because the left is capable of establishing this utopian goal that's really impossible, but you can use said utopian goal to get infinite bureaucratic funding. There's no amount of money that the West could give to Africa to make Africa wealthy because it would just get stolen by the dictators. And so if you look at the funding for charities that go to Africa, most of it's skimmed off by the dictators because the dictators have no interest in the people getting wealthier, because then if you keep people in grinding poverty,
bam, bam, bam. So true. It's so true. So you guys liking Humanities? You liking Humanities?
they're not going to rebel because they're too poor to rebel. And so the left jumps on these issues that can never be solved, like male or female differences or poverty in Africa, whatever. And then if you have an issue that can't get solved, you have infinite funding forever because you just say, hey, I need more money. And so you can keep your job, you can hire your friends, you can raise your social status. And people do what their incentive structures tell them to do, and they'll develop very complex rationalizations. And in the leftist worldview, it's perfectly justified because you're building the utopia. And so what happened is that, and woke people are about a 10% of America's population. So America statistically is 1/3 red, 1/3 blue, 1/3 politically non-affiliated. And the politically non-affiliateds from studies aren't centrists. They just don't care. And so woke people in that blue third of America, woke people are about 10%. The other 2/3 of the left are moderates. And that is an infinitesimally small amount of the global market share for companies like Disney or Google or whatever. But that 10% are the people who run the bureaucracies. And so they could get social authority because the bureaucracy has the power, it has the guns, or it has the guns for now. And thus, the kinds of ideologies that rationalize the bureaucracy are the ones that win. And the bureaucracy found that women make a very useful ally. because women are naturally weaker than men. And what the bureaucracy's deal is that we will give you everything a husband would have provided in the pre-industrial world, no strings attached. Because in the pre-industrial world, your husband and your family, they protected you, they provided you resources, they provided social insurance, in exchange for sex, basically. And so the bureaucracy told women, we can set you free, we can liberate you from the tyranny of custom and culture, and in exchange, you give us your loyalty. So the welfare state provides an insurance, the police provide protectors, and the military provide protectors, the bureaucratic governments provide work. And so the bureaucracy built this deal with basically single women. If you look at the Democrats, of the statistics of the left, it is largely single women, where they would replace the role men had in exchange for unalloyed loyalty. And this deal was made about a century ago. And so as this time has passed further and further on, the bureaucracy has had to entrench itself more so and more so in their base.
By deconstructing the family and making women idealize being single, so that they have more players
of support. So it's kind of spiraled off into greater and greater degrees of silliness over time.
Okay. So is it that whenever...
You see, when we started this, you all assumed he was a leftist. You all assumed he was a leftist. I was like, I don't know. This guy's he's a mixed bag here. He's a mixed bag. You know, because he's sitting there saying that, you know, his philosophy is that God, you know, he's at war with God. He's a complex guy.
The feminine mode of being gets power of the institutions, that's when we have this weak men make hard times moment where everything goes awry? Or have there been times in history where...
No, this is purely female based. It's based to basically make women rich. Women have no talent, while at the same time degrading themselves and completely selling themselves. But it's like, it's feeding into like, OnlyFans is basically feeding into like, I'm going to try and you're going to feel happy because you're making money and people are expressing appreciation to you. And in our social media society, that's the equivalent of love, because and it only continues the cycle of mental depression, both for those who are producing content and those who are consuming.
I don't know. This is not when the female way of being,
but the women have all the power
has control of the institutions. That does not necessarily mean that something is going to be bad. And have we seen moments in history where female matriarchies have just done well by the society?
There's a correlation there. It's not causation. So there are weak societies that are it's funny, called a weak society masculine. But you look at India before the British. The British were able to conquer India outnumbered 100-1. India was a society where women basically couldn't leave the house. And so there are some very weak societies that don't give women authority. Every single society in history has been a patriarch.
Catch it tomorrow. This is a good episode. This is like a really interesting... Humanities are always fun. They're always fun. Thanks for stopping by, Kathy.
That's just an anthropological fact. And there was a lot of pseudoscience and lying that went into this in the post-World War II era. So there are no matriarchal human societies. There are strong societies that give women authority. So Anglo-America, English-speaking societies are a great example of this. English-speaking societies, English speakers rule the world today, but they're one of the societies in history that gives women the most authority. Same thing with the Romans. Same thing with the Vikings or the Spartans. And interestingly, according to mysticism, all things lead back to their self. So if you push a society too masculine, it will end up effeminate. And if you make a society very feminine, it could circle back to masculine. Because if you're in a society where women have a lot of authority, it's often hyper-masculine men, because the men have to be hyper-masculine to impress the women. Well, if you have a society where women have no social authority, the men become effeminate because they don't have to try. And so you have these dualities where the best system is one where men and women are both strong. And the worst system is one in which men and women are both weak.
All right. It feels like we have a system right now where women are strong. They're coming into their own. They're performing very well in the job market, pulling ahead of men. There's a wage gap. It is certainly on the side of women. Women that have not had kids out-earn men of the same age group.
Yes.
So why then have we not made hyper-masculine men?
That's a great question.
Hasn't happened yet.
So
it will start to happen. It'll start to happen. I'll become the norm.
So it's because there's very little incentive for the men to do so. And so what we're seeing now has happened before in history.
I think that they have a certain sense of hopelessness. That's the problem. They have a sense of hopelessness.
We are the greatest example of it. It happened. Ancient Greece had a feminist movement. There's a really funny story here I can get to if you'd like. Ancient Greece is the feminist movement. Then the Romans did.
I think you need the crisis to come in order for men to sort of start stepping up. That's what ends up happening. You need a crisis to sort of trigger men into action. And then a few men start, and then other men start emulating. That's basically what happens.
The Arabs had a feminist movement 1,000 years ago too. We forget about that. There was a point when Islam was the society that gave women the most rights of anyone in the world.
Unexpected.
Yeah, 1,000 years ago. Islam went through their whole separate arc, like the fall of Rome that no one knows about. So what happens in a society like that is that you've removed responsibility for women inside the system.
I told you, it's not some crazy leftist.
You have a system where men and women are responsible to each other. They have to play into each other. But what's happened instead is that the bureaucracy has strategically enabled toxic femininity for their own benefit. And so our society has the worst female mental health of any record we have in history, because through doing so, women have isolated themselves from their communities, families, value systems. And it's like SSRI use is super high. The female mental health has collapsed. Just if you give me a metric, it would probably be bad now. Women are less happy now than any time we've had records for, going back at least to World War II. And so it's clear that it's not a system that's working. It's a system based off a lack of responsibility. If you look at the current social order, and this is true for both men and women, there's no reward for being pro-social. If you're the kind of person who cares about your community and you want to serve for your nation militarily or invent a new scientific discovery, if you want to be earnest, our society will ruthlessly mock you. And I think that's a very bad sign.
Yeah, I very much agree with that. None of this feels like it leads to civil war. This feels like a world that ends in a whimper. It feels like, honestly, if I just step back and look, I go, America's birth rate is plummeting. Whatever societies are keeping.
And in case you joined late, this started, the first question out of the gate is, why do you think we're going to have a civil war within 5 years? And that's why he's coming to this question now. Everything you're describing here doesn't sound like civil war.
Their birth rates high. They're just going to ride the wave of the decline, which will be ugly for everybody, but they'll ride the wave of that and then they'll just repopulate. Why, after hearing all of the sort of case for weakness, mental health issues and all that, do you come to the conclusion that we will have a civil war in the near future?
Yes. The parallel I'm looking at here is the fall of the Roman Republic. And this is around 100 BC. And around the fall of the Roman Republic, Rome had started out as these allied city-states in Italy, and they had conquered the known world, and they were a reluctant superpower. They conquered the area from Spain to like Turkey and Syria and Greece. And with it, there's a lot of parallels to our current society. The fall of the Roman Republic saw the massive rise in inequality, the rise of mega corporations, the death of the Roman middle class, the collapse of birth rates, the rise of feminism, massive social liberalization. There was massive political polarization between the optimates and the populares parties. So Rome spiraled into a civil war. There were the rise of charismatic cults of strongmen like Elon or Donald Trump or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. And so there's a tremendous amount of parallels. And what happened over time is that Rome had a series of civil wars, which turned it from a republic to a empire run by an emperor. And something I should have thrown in there too is that Rome had a huge immigration at the time. A third of Italy's population were immigrants, mostly slaves, and so that killed the Roman middle class. And so the Roman civil wars were started by a populist politician basically running off the "let's rebuild the Roman middle class" agenda and make Rome great again. And so actually he got assassinated, which is how I could have I predicted Trump would get assassinated, or an attempted assassination, 2 years in advance. And so I was looking off that parallel. And so
why do people want that figure type dead?
So the left thinks that they are on the moral arc of history. The left's basically religious worldview is that the moral arc of history demands they win. And so when they see something that goes against the moral arc of history, their immediate thought is not that there's some underlying like demographic or like systemic issue that's causing it. It's that bad man stopping progress. And so the left has projected all of the reason they're not succeeding onto Trump as an individual without looking at, I've never heard a leftist, I'm from Pennsylvania, I've never heard a leftist talk about deindustrialization or stuff like that, or the financial issues that the left really dropped class as a social issue. And people are desperate. And so when you're desperate, you look for anything that works. And so I think they would see the death of Trump as a way to stop the right forever. And I mean, the problem is that the right doesn't actually have any coherent leadership besides Trump. When Trump dies, and he's an old guy, it's going to happen sooner or later. The right has no other leadership structure. And so that's the answer I give.
If you like this conversation, check out this episode to learn more.
Spain did something that's pretty comparable to what we're doing, where Spain had all this silver from Mexico and South America.
Another
the
episode?
Big prediction I'm known for is I think we're going to have a revolution or civil war.
Wow. I was watching part 2. Is there part 3? Wow. I don't even know which part came first. Wow. We're definitely not doing that tonight. I thought I was getting an hour and 20 minutes. It's another hour and 25 left. Maybe we'll do it next week. I don't know. What do you guys think? Should we do this next week? I'll put a quick poll up here. Give me in Rumble, give me a Y for yes if you want me to do this like that next part, or an N for no. Oh, there's a lot of yeses. Wow. Okay. All right. It was a fun episode. It was fun. Told you, Humanities can be cool. People really like the Humanities episodes. So it's like you just end up covering a lot of interesting conversations. All right. I'm gonna be landing my plane because I'm feeling tired. Let me see how my chat's going. 80% of you saying yes here. All right. Tuesday night is the debate. Make sure you're here. Make sure you're back here. Tuesday nights. I'm probably going to start like 7:30. This debate starts at 8 o'clock. I'll probably start like 7:30 or so. So Tuesday nights. Of course, I plan on doing a show tomorrow also. But be aware. Mark your calendars. Debate. Tuesday night. We're starting here at 7:30. Don't be late. I will catch you all then. I'm going to land my plane relatively quickly because I'm tired. I'm not going to kid you. I'm very tired. I'm going to do a quick check over at, make sure I didn't miss, in case I missed anything over here. I didn't. We're good. Okay. Fine. The diggers are all happy. You're all happy, diggers. I need another monitor. I wouldn't know where to put a third monitor. I wouldn't even know where to put it. Wouldn't even know where to put it. Put it behind the camera? Maybe. I'll figure out how that would work. All right. I'm landing my plane here relatively quickly. So you know what that means? You know what that means? It means, first and foremost, stay away from lab meat because lab meat sucks and it's going to kill you. That's not medical advice. That's just, you're worth more than lab meat. You are. You're worth more than lab meat. No matter what they tell you, and they will tell you, do not eat the bugs. Have a good night. And as always, hold speed.